Hello and welcome back to the Radio Gamescast. As always, I'm your host Ryan. Today I'm joined by my lovely co-host Wyatt, because we're going to talk
Hello.
about Star Wars Outlaws.
A-
We've finished it. We've played the whole game.
And no one else in this cast cared enough to play it,
I think we got a few. I'll play it when it's on 50% sale in a couple months, as
which
Ubisoft is
seems to
known
be
to
the
do.
which seems to be the a lot of the reactions that I've seen.
Yeah, not an uncommon thought process for Ubisoft games lately.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so we're gonna do the format we always do with these, which is at first here we're not gonna be talking about any spoilery things. We're gonna be saving that for the second half of the video. It's not that hard with this game. I think the story is. I think we're gonna have a significant amount to say about it, but we can hold off on that until we're through talking about gameplay. And we're gonna have a couple things to go through here, I think, because this is a interesting game. The reaction to
I
it has been very strong.
so I think I said this when we talked about it a little bit a few weeks ago, but regardless on how you feel about the overall game, I think it'll be one of the most interesting games to actually talk about this year. Because there's so many peaks and valleys going on here that it's very difficult to sum up this game in a is it good or is it bad? Because I think it's just way more complicated than
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think so. To get the first part of the way, I think Wyatt and I both very much enjoyed our time with Star Wars Outlaws overall,
Mhm.
but it
Mhm.
is definitely not like this game does not hit consistently. There are
Mhm.
some real peaks and valleys here, and I think like that's what for most people is bringing this to sit around like a 7 out of 10 on those scales. It's probably where I would put it as well. But I would say that the high is made up for any of the lows that I had with it.
Yeah. I
And
will
as we'll get
say,
into, I had some problems with this game. I had
yeah.
some real issues, but I think the things that worked well enough that I was really
I
in for the whole ride. And I did a lot of side content too. Like I wound up doing a
Mhm.
lot more than I thought I would.
The frustrating thing about this game is that it borders on an 8 a lot. Like, it gets
It's like
very close.
the peaks are at
There's
like a
y
9, right? And that's the problem
Yeah,
because you consistently are hitting really high highs, but the
yeah,
lows are bad. So
yeah. It just fluctuates the whole time.
yeah,
It's fascinating,
so
fascinating.
for those who don't know a ton about this game and just kind of look at it through Ubisoft things, Star Wars Outlaws is like it's in a very open world, system oriented, like almost narrative-y version of Uncharted. I would say like a
Yeah.
much more open world type thing than Uncharted
It
typically
really
is. But
it really does feel like if you took an Uncharted game and then say like Assassin's Creed or Far Cry or something and you just smushed them together.
yeah,
In a lot of ways, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing.
yeah, like the combat plays most similarly to Uncharted, I would say, having run
Mhm.
through a couple other Ubisoft games recently. But a lot of the stealth stuff takes after Assassin's Creed and is not as good. Not that Assassin's Creed is a paragon of stealth gameplay, but I do think there's some real issues here.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and yeah, I think a lot of that is just combining to create this sort of weird package that's kind of endearing because it's got a lot of great parts, but it may not be fully finished.
It's kind of like in those classic like action movies where the main character fails at the beginning and the character's like, "You got a lot of heart, kid, but you got a lot to learn." That's kind of what
Yeah,
this feels like.
or in a Bake Off, where they go, it's got a soggy bottom. It's a pastry with a soggy bottom. Uh, it's okay. Uh, but there are some great things here. Like the mini games are all
Mhm.
excellent, and I'm always a fan of any type of mini game that you can throw in a game. Do it,
Mhm.
and this is one
Mhm.
of the ones that gets all of them right. There's a couple of arcade games you can play. There's Sabak, a like Kessel variant of
Yeah.
Sabak, I think they call it.
Yeah, there's different. I didn't know this because for context, I think we're both Star Wars fans.
Oh
But
yeah,
speaking personally, I'm not the biggest, like, I don't know every single bit of Star Wars lore because there's only so much that I actually care about because I'm more a fan of
there's only
like
so much time in the day to learn about Star Wars lore. Why?
I can't tell you all the different types of ships and all the different like classes that are involved with that. I don't know, and I'm just gonna be honest, I don't care. It just is what it is. So, um, I didn't know. what I'm trying to say is I didn't know there were different versions of Sabacc, and there are even different versions of Sabacc that you see in the game, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The version that we get is kind of like a traditional card game mixed with like blackjack, or not blackjack, Texas Hold'em almost. Whereas like there's other versions of Sabacc both in other Star Wars media and this game where they're holding like 6 cards or something. And in this version that you play
Yeah.
in the game, it's only 2,
And
which I
I
thought
believe
was
you can
interesting.
buy decks for the regular version of Sabacc, which is that like 6 card or 5 or 6 card game. I think they
Mhm,
sell those at Galaxy's Edge and Disney, but
mhm.
um, this is a different variant that it seems like the game has come up with, and it plays really well. I think it's a good little mix
I
up.
really enjoy it. I normally don't care too much for these like card games in larger open world games. Not that they're not well made. It's just for me there's so many other things to focus on. But I what I liked here is I had a bit of that like addicting, like you would always searching for new Gwent decks and Gwent cards and stuff in The Witcher, which I think kind of drew a
Yeah,
lot of
totally.
people to playing it. And here you can collect different shift tokens. There's different ways to cheat, which I thought was really fun and very like on brand.
Yeah.
I think that's the most consistently one of the most consistently good things about this game is that it gets Star Wars and the seedy crime syndicate underbelly aspect of Star
This
Wars
gives me the
incredibly
feeling that
well.
I had hoped 1313 would give me. I think
Mhm.
that's a good way to put it. For those who don't know, 1313 is a canceled Star Wars game project from ages ago that was meant to be in like Coruscant's underbelly. And
Yeah.
this feels like what I would have wanted out of that. I think this is like I can let 1313 rest now because I think I've gotten to play a version of that.
You've gotten your
Um,
13 itch scratched well enough, I would
Yeah, and
say.
like why it's really right here when he's talking about the Star Wars like being done really right. I think even more so than the Jedi games, which are great games that I really
Mhm.
enjoy. I think this feels like you're just in the universe,
Yeah.
which is really cool. It's a thing that like I think is not easy to get across.
Mhm.
There's a lot of like weird things about it that just kind of add up together to make that feeling. I think a lot of it is that the settlements are really big. They're kind
Mhm.
of wiry and in their design and very large, and you can do things like sneak into syndicate controlled areas,
Mhm.
and that will have you can get caught and arrested in those areas and forced out if you're on bad terms with the syndicate, or you can be able to go into them and just kind of roam around if you're on good terms. And that's the other kind of like big system in this game, aside from story related stuff, is the syndicate thing, which is you have a
Mhm.
reputation with 4 syndicates that go up and down as you do actions and missions and take contracts for each of the syndicates and continue the main story. You'll be butting up against them, and so you're kind of like balancing all of those different reputations, and you might like be doing a mission for the Pikes that pisses off the Huts, and then you have to deal with that, and that can lead to some really fun stuff. Like
Yeah.
I was on the bad side of the Pikes for most of the game, and that meant at a certain point I had kill squads of Pikes coming after me at a point where I could not go like pay them off to not do that.
Mhm.
Just 'cause I didn't have access to their vendor at that time. I was in a mission chain that kind of like locked me to a place for just a little while, and that meant I was like actually on the back foot for a bit because these kill squads can be really aggressive at the start of the game
Yeah.
uh, when you're just getting started out and you don't have a lot of the tools that you get in the back half, and you can be in some weird positions because of that, where you're like in the world having to just like be involved in speeder races everywhere to get past a bunch of
It's
Pike's
it's
kill
one
squads.
it's one of those things that whatever you want to say about Ubisoft, and there's a lot to be said about their design. One thing they're really good at is having a lot of different open world systems and then having them clash together that create some really cool moments.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
I think they're better made here than in any other
yeah.
Ubisoft
Well, I
thing
think
I've
the
seen.
thing is there's less of them going on, but they're more developed as a result. And so I think
Yes.
those collision moments you get are more exciting because it doesn't feel as much of a mess,
Yeah,
if
because
that
it's
makes
really the
sense.
syndicate stuff, the reputation, and then the wanted system for the Imperials are really the only like actual systems. But then you are doing contracts which put you in areas that are getting changed because of your reputation and because of like
Mhm,
if you're wanted by the Imperials, they'll put up blockades around the map and like try to block you from getting back to cities.
mhm.
And if you get too high and wanted, you have death troopers coming after you that you have to sneak into their camp and like erase your history, and so they think
Plus,
you're dead.
To add on to that too, one thing, and I don't know if you had the same experience that I did, but I thought the currency economy in this was actually really well done. I felt
Yeah.
like I never had like just completely expendable credits the entire time, which is great because there's moments where you're doing a mission and then either an independent syndicate or one of the other three crime syndicates will offer more money to finish a mission for them. Say you're doing a smuggling contract, you can give the goods to a different syndicate that are offering more money but lower your reputation with another syndicate. And so a lot of the time, and because you don't earn that many credits throughout the entire game, or at least enough credits to kind of where you're not just like recklessly spending money at any
Hmm.
point. It does a good job of trying like, do I need credits right now or do I need reputation? And it really comes down to where you are in the story, where you are with your
If you have
upgrades
a
and what
way
you
to like get
need.
your reputation back if you lose it.
Yeah.
Um,
And so
yeah,
they did
it can be really
that
interesting.
that decision making was really really well done. And I think it's a good example of like when Ubisoft just stops throwing everything into their game and they really pare things back and develop what they already have. I think it shows like how much better their open world systems
This game
work.
is better for the stuff that it doesn't have. Like, for example, one of
Mhm,
the planets is not open world. It's a small city that has one mission that
mhm.
you actually get involved in combat in on. But that makes it better because you're there for a significant amount of time, like talking to people, going around the city, learning how it works. And it's really
Yep.
interesting because you aren't constantly fighting. You aren't always going into an open world space on that planet. It has a
Plus the
really
nice
cool
thing
aesthetic.
Plus, the nice thing that they do, for anyone who doesn't know, there's different planets in the game, which you can fly to on your ship, and there's also an orbit outside of each planet. They make up for it being a city by also having probably the most developed, like, orbit of any of the other planets. There's this really
Yeah.
cool like there's a lot of really cool like ice like asteroids everywhere. There's a bunch of different locations. There's like this fog that messes with your sensors, so you can't like lock on to enemies when you're fighting in it, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I just think the diversity of how they of not only the locations visually for each planet, but also how they the design process they went about developing each planet was very different, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I think it really works well for the game.
Mhm.
The space stuff is sort of, I don't want to say an afterthought, but it is definitely not the primary thing you're going to be doing.
Yes.
I would say, like, honestly, if you're playing Lego Star Wars, you're doing more space stuff than in this game.
Probably. I think in terms of focus, like on foot on planets was definitely the focus, and I
Yeah.
think that's fine. I do think if we ever do get a sequel, which we'll get into the prospects of if ever that's ever happening or not, but I think if they do a sequel, I think that would be a really fun place to expand because I think they have something with the space aspect of it. It just needs to be developed a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because
Uh,
I didn't hate the space combat. I think it's pretty basic, and there is a bit of an issue with control that I have. But I think they have something that's solid and works for the game that this is,
yeah,
if
I
that
actually
makes
got
sense.
pretty into the space combat by the end. I was having a fun time with it once I had, like, upgraded things and picked the weapons I liked and whatnot.
That's the thing.
Um,
It really doesn't give a good. It doesn't have a good first impression because it feels very clunky and
Yeah, there's also a
strange.
problem in that the game. So when you take contracts for the syndicates, they're, I assume, random or like picked from a list. And one of them can be like go secure high value things from a space place,
Mhm.
and occasionally that will be a contract to go kill like a pirate gunship. If you get that contract early in the game before you've had a chance to upgrade your ship, you will not be able to complete it. And it's very, very
Because what you
funny.
because what you start with ship combat is you can fly around, you can
And you can
shoot,
go plink plink. That's
and
it.
you can go plink plink. That's it. Later in the game, you get different like missiles, you get different evasive maneuvers, you get this automated turret that
Yeah,
shoots
you
for
get
you.
like
If
vastly more capable at space
if I
combat.
do have if there is a complaint that I have in terms of space combat is that because you can get like missiles that lock onto multiple targets and you have this turret that basically does all the shooting for you, it does start to feel a little bit too automated sometimes, and it feels like I'm not putting in as much effort. um, as I think I would want
Yeah.
to otherwise. I think once you get to the like, if if you're wanted in space and like the big like, Imperial ships start rolling in, I think that really shows off the space combat the best when they actually put pressure on you. Because the other thing is, I feel like a lot of the times with like combat encounters in space, ships are not aggressive enough. They'll just kind of, and I play this on like in terms of the way I set up difficulty, combat difficulty, I think was on like the highest difficulty for me,
Hmm.
and it felt like ships were just kind of flying around, and I kind of wish they would actually attack me a little bit more than they did.
Yeah. I agree with all that. I do think my like main disappointment with the structural part of the game is that we really don't get much spacey stuff outside of the ship. And you
Mhm.
can't stop in your ship in space. You have to land to like walk around your
Which it
ship.
was a very strange decision, and
Which
I
like, it
didn't
really feels like
understand
they
that.
should have added a thing where like maybe when you're doing a hyperspace jump or something, you can walk around your ship or something to get a
Mhm,
little bit more of that like Jedi Fallen Order feeling of exploring
mhm.
your ship and whatnot. Because it's weird, especially because there are things you sometimes like maybe I need to pick a mission to do and I can't like look for contracts that I might want to do unless I land and I'm having to like go through 3 loading screens to do this.
Yeah.
When it would have been nice to be able to just like, oh, I want to stand up in my ship and go walk around.
Which I
Uh,
will say, speaking of loading screens, how did you? I want to ask you this: how did you feel the the implementation was done in terms of like flying to orbit, flying down to a planet? It's essentially a loading screen, right? To
yeah, it's
me,
basically what Starfield does, except it's technically more seamless, but I really don't think it is.
to me, I think the implementation they have for the kind of game that they're going is actually totally fine. Um, I don't think it adds a whole lot to the game for you to be able to just land anywhere in like on Tashara or
Yeah, I
on
wouldn't
Tatooine
want
or
that.
whatever.
I
It
think
really
it's
doesn't
fine that you
add
have landing
much.
points. I do think the actual animation that plays when you're landing is long. It's very long
It
if you
does
want
feel
to sit through the
long.
whole thing. And I
Yeah.
do like they let you skip it, but it takes a long time to load if you're going to planet side. It's much faster if you're
Mhm.
going to space. And if you do skip it, you get the cool screen wipe, which I think feels very Star Wars. I'm totally fine with it,
And
like that effect.
I will say what they do that helps quite a bit is they have a really nice musical sting as you're flying to and from a planet,
Yeah.
which does help, I will say.
Which to be fair, they have the great musical stings everywhere.
The music in general, incredibly well done. I think they struck a really good balance of like it sounds Star Wars, but they also add their own kind of like techno stuff and their own instrumentation that kind of makes it feel like its
Yeah.
own
I
thing.
mean,
But
I
it
love the
definitely
main theme of this game.
feels
I think the main theme is
yeah.
excellent. When I boot up the game and get the like na 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 na, I think it's amazing.
Mhm, mhm.
I think like having that identifiable string, especially because they use it as a motif a couple of times.
They
Like
do.
they
Yeah.
actually do in the game, which is a thing that I always look for. I always love when games do like musical motifs and actually carry that through line, because it's rare. Not a lot of games do it, just because it's difficult. You need to have your music team work really well with the narrative teams for that to happen.
Well,
Um,
and music for Star Wars is so important because it's very
yeah.
similar to how music is used. Like other examples I think of is like Indiana Jones or like Pirates of the Caribbean, where the score isn't just there. It feels like it was intentionally like edited in a way to kind of invigorate what's going on, right? Like if you think of again another example is the Pirates movies. Those the score is so iconic and it sticks in your
Hmm.
head because they play it at just the right moments to accentuate something specific. Whether it's like, oh, this budding romance between Han and Leia, or like we're fighting in space and it has like a very specific sound to it. So it's always important to have those motifs in a Star Wars score and to use it properly. And I think this does that incredibly well, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I think that's one of the real highlights of the game. Is throughout the whole game, the audio tends to be great.
Yes.
I do think there's a couple things like early on. I think without getting into spoilers for the story, this kind of structural problem I have with this game is it kind of feels like there isn't a middle of the story, but there is the part of the game that you are mostly playing is the middle of the story, which is just kind of going
Yes.
around doing stuff. but nothing that important tends to happen in those sections, and your
It's the
like
weakest
companion
part.
characters you've connected, yeah, like you're picking
It's
up a
the weakest
crew. That's
part.
kind of the conceit of this, and that crew is great. Like they're very interesting characters when you're doing their missions, but they really
They're
don't
fun.
do anything
Yeah, you
outside
have
of that.
you have 1 or 2 missions with them, which can be fun. I kind of wish we'd gotten a little bit more character stuff out of it
It felt
because
like
there are
we
a lot of
needed
fun.
loyalty missions or something. Like we needed a Mass
Yes,
Effect loyalty mission.
I would have loved like character specific side quests. I think the two, yeah, the middle part is kind of confusing because you're meeting all these characters, but you're not knowing that much about them. You're not learning
Yeah,
that much about them.
and
I
it's
would
hard to
say the
talk
two
about without getting into
exceptions.
full spoilers.
Mhm.
But
I
the
would say that
reason, oh yeah, go ahead.
I would say the two exceptions to that. I think Nyx, your animal companion,
Yes.
is there's a mission related to Nyx that I think is like introduced in the story at just the right time. And because Nyx is an active like companion that is part of your gameplay, I think it's really well done there. And I also mostly enjoyed the relationship that you have with your robot buddy ND5, which I won't get
Yeah.
into,
With
but
the problem
those
or
were
the
fun.
reason those two stand out, I think, is because the game knows you have those two the whole time. Because they're
Exactly.
you pick them up before you can leave the first planet. Whereas the others are kind of non-linear in which one you get, and that I think doesn't work great. Like I don't actually think this game gained a lot from being non-linear. I
I
almost would
agree.
have preferred if they just did it in the order they tell you. In like ND5 will say a thing that's like, oh, you should go to this place first, and then you can do that. And I think the game works best if you just follow his instruction
I agree.
about that stuff. And I kind of wish they had just gone with that, so they could have had the characters from those missions be involved in later stuff.
I agree.
Because that's definitely the thing that's missing. It's like it doesn't feel like you're a crew for most of the game, despite having these people, uh, because
They
you
have
just aren't.
some optional dialogue that but that doesn't really add anything to the
Yeah,
game.
like they need something that you can do in a gameplay moment with them. And there's like one
Yeah.
or two that Indy 5 is involved in, which are
Mhm.
really fun, but it's pretty rare. It just feels like you need a little bit more of that stuff, especially because like the game tries to bill Indy 5 as your like enforcer for a little while. So you're like, oh, I have this person that is supposed to be like an effective combat person, except I'm the one
Yeah.
doing all the gunning down.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. This game screamed for more structure because that's been a typical Ubisoft thing for a while, which is we have the story, but the middle chunk of our story, which is like 95% of our gameplay, basically, we want to leave as open as possible. So we're gonna have a story where there's like 3 or 4 like mini stories that then kind of coalesce at the end. And I think for the kind of story they wanted to tell here, that works against it. It's
yeah,
one of the biggest blemishes in terms of trying to combine a cinematic action platformer like a Naughty Dog game and trying to combine their traditional open world. That's really like where it doesn't work. Is that they needed to I think they just needed to commit to the narrative like cinematic platformer aspect more. I like the open world part, but the kind of like sandbox. Oh, you can go to Tatooine first if you want, or you can go to it. No, no, no. Get rid of that. it's
yeah, because
it just
the way
hurts
you
the
can still get
story.
that feeling is you open up a mission on Tatooine later on, right? Like you don't need to
Yeah.
be. You can go to them in any order. I think in reality that really just makes the story feel a little disjointed.
Mhm.
Which we'll get into actual problems with that in a bit. But in while we're still in the non spoiler section, I think other than those problems, the biggest issue is the stealth sandbox. Uh, and this is
Yes.
the thing that Wyatt and I have talked about a lot.
Mhm.
So functionally, this is I would almost say it's very similar to Watch Dogs and like how you have options in stealth, where
Absolutely.
you have like Nyx is kind of your tech tools, and he can be
It's your
distracting.
drone or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
except he's the best theming by far. Nyx is a
Yeah.
great companion, and he's great in gameplay. I think he's one of the things that like it unequivocally works very well.
Say, but I had Nyx pick up a grenade and Kay said, "Go get the boom ball." I was laughing so hard. That is the cutest thing I've ever.
Yeah, Kay and Nyx's interactions are perfect.
Mhm.
For people that complain about like the food minigame are insane.
Oh, it's so cute. It's
It's so
adorable.
cute. yeah, there's a mini game where you basically are eating with K or with K and Nix, and you have
Mhm.
little button prompts to do it. It's just a dumb little side activity that gives you a
It's not
thing.
meant to be difficult. It's not meant to be challenging. It's just like a character bonding moment, which this game desperately needed more of for the other
Yeah, because
characters.
I think the thing is, like, I think Wyatt and I are both going to agree that Nix and K are pretty strong characters by the end of this,
Yeah,
and ND5 as well, because like the three of them are the most involved in everything, and
yeah.
so you get the most time with them, and they're the most interesting because of that. The
They
other
don't
characters
suffer
have a
from
lot
the
of
structure.
potential. Yeah, the other
Yeah,
characters have a lot of potential to be interesting, but they're just not in enough of the game for that to be a
yeah.
thing.
And there's not a lot you can do when you can pick them up in any order. You can't have very situational. You can't have conversations
Aside from like a
that
loyalty
take
mission or something,
place.
but they didn't do that. Like that's not
No.
there. The closest thing is the pre-order mission, which I don't know if you played, Wyatt, called Jabba's Gambit.
Oh,
Uh,
so I did I yeah, I don't think I had access to that.
I played this game through the Ubisoft Plus PC subscription, which again, Ubisoft has a bunch of ways to not have to pay full price for their games because I could have waited a little while, but because I just paid them $15 for a subscription, I got to play that, and that meant I had access to all the like highest edition stuff, including the Jabba's Gambit mission, which was the sort of pre-order incentive.
Mhm.
And that mission's pretty good. It's like a pretty spicy mission. You have like ND5 running with you for a lot of it, and you get like some backstory on him and Jabba.
Mm,
It felt real weird that that was a pre-order exclusive thing because it actually gave like a lot of character information, um,
mm.
and had some interesting choices. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's not great. That's not great. Don't
but
love that.
good mission if you have access to it. If not, you're not really missing that much. It's not super critical, but it does have a little bit more of the like you're doing a thing with a companion feeling because ND5's involved in it.
Yeah.
Um,
It is
yeah,
worth
but the
pointing
stealth
out.
sandbox thing that we were talking about,
Mhm.
to loop us back to that, I think you'll see some of it in the footage that's playing. And for reference, all the footage that's playing is early game. There's not going to be any spoilers here outside of maybe like a cutscene from the first hour or two of the game, but nothing crazy. Um, the stealth sandbox is weird. It's
Yes.
You can tell that they wanted it to be more than it is. Uh, in that you have a lot of tools, you have nicks, and you have all this stuff that lets you get kind of chaotic without revealing yourself. But in reality, as soon as a shot is fired, no matter what the shot was, your position and everyone goes into like a crazy alert status.
Mhm.
And generally, that will either fail a mission or you have to stop it before an actual alarm is pulled.
Mhm.
And there's ways to make that interesting, but I do think there's like a significant chunk of this game where you're just kind of avoiding using the majority of the tools that you have because they cause problems. A good
Yeah.
example is the Crimson Dawn outfit. So you get an outfit for maxing out your reputation with each of the groups, and they have a set of perks. This full transmog in the game, you can use whatever look you want, but you can get some cool like combat perks based on which outfits you're using. The Crimson Dawn ones are all stealth related. Um, and they make stealth pretty easy. They reduce enemy ranges and they like make cameras less likely to see you and all this cool stuff. But one of the things is that when you have the like set bonus for them is that you get when you drop a smoke bomb, you get a stun shot back. And when you stun shot somebody, you get a smoke bomb back, essentially. You're supposed to go around throwing smoke bombs and taking someone down in the smoke bomb when they can't see you, and then using your stun shot to take someone else down. When you try to do that in actuality, the game kind of falls apart. It really, first of all, because the AI is not great. In fact, I would say it's
That's
actively very bad for the
that's
majority of
what
the
I
game.
want. I want to circle back to that
Yeah,
in
we'll
a
talk more
minute.
about that after I finish the spiel. Um, your toolkit is weird. You have to access it with a very strange set of like. It just feels like a weird way to use a
Mhm.
controller. You have to hold left on the D-pad, and then you have the face buttons do a thing, which is typically like games that will do that modifier action. It's almost always a bumper or a trigger that is your modifier key, and not
It felt like
a like
they didn't
D-pad button.
it felt like they didn't want to do like a radial wheel. which is just what they should have
Yeah,
done,
they should have done a
because that
radio
would
wheel
have.
or something. Like,
There's nothing wrong with I'm a pro radio wheel gamer. All right.
yeah, same.
I think they work in a lot of situations. It feels like they were trying to do anything except that, and they arrived at something that felt very similar to Red Dead Redemption 2, where it felt like sometimes to select an item mid combat, you have to hold
Yeah.
like six different buttons, and it does feel very
Especially for
clunky.
stuff like it's stuff like the smoke bombs and grenades that you need quickly. Like you have to
Mhm.
have access to those things very quickly. And I think the way that Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs handle that stuff is generally better, where you have like a dedicated tool button and you just change which
Mhm.
tool is in that slot.
Which is
Um,
weird because they kind of already have one. Your stun shot, which is like a
yeah,
silenced
like
stun
the stun
shot,
shot doesn't need to always be the thing there.
or have that button be like your dedicated tool button, right? And then have the stun shot be one of the like types of shots for your blaster. It just felt so strange that they dedicated a whole button to the stun
Yeah,
shot. Which I
it's
get,
very
it's a tool that I
strange.
use, which I get, it's a tool that's used all the time, but when you have so many other tools that come in, especially in the late game, it feels like such a waste of your controller, because we both played this on controller. It feels like such a waste of your buttons
Yeah,
for one thing.
it really feels like they could have made better use of that.
Mhm,
Yeah, a lot of little minor stuff like that. That feels like this is where I think when people talk about this game feels a little bit underbaked.
mhm.
I think that's what they mean. Is there's a lot of like control oddities that just feel strange. Which is really weird because we have to get into the history of Massive now, which is that Massive makes The Division, which is an extremely well made like third person shooter with tons of buttons because it's a like Destiny style game that you've got lots of abilities, you've got lots of like weapons to swap between. It has a cover system that this doesn't have either. So you've got like so many more inputs to account for, and it does a great job generally of accounting for that stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, and Outlaws
And
does not.
notably, one thing, especially with Division 2, they had great AI that was genuinely tricky and would try and flank you, or try and get behind you whenever possible. Really, really solid AI, especially for a AAA game where AI, I feel
Yeah.
like, tends to get a little less attention than it should. Very good AI. I don't know what happened here, because we got to talk about AI now, because in
Yep.
my opinion, it it takes because while I agree with all of the issues with control and how it relates to stealth sections, I think so many of those problems would have been alleviated and in combat if the AI was better, because they are just dumb as bricks, and it really a lot of the time doesn't promote you to use your different options.
Yeah.
And it kind of it really does fall apart sometimes. Because they're just kind of standing there, just kind of looking around, not really sure what's going on. They're not really taking cover all that often.
Yeah, which is
Um,
strange because like so I after playing Outlaws and finishing it, because I do want to say I think this game takes a really good amount of time to finish. I think this is a very reasonably length Ubisoft game,
mhm,
and it feels good to finish. I went back and played a couple of other more recent Ubisoft things. So I played some AC Mirage and AC Valhalla to kind of
mhm,
see like how the AI compared. And like Valhalla has its fair share of problems. I would say often just as many as this game. It's far more bloated.
yeah.
But it has enemy AIs that act very differently. Like there are enemy types that will do different things in combat, and even if the most of the game that does not matter, and the stealth AI is just as bad. Like the stealth AI is not any better in that game, but the actual combat AIs are. It makes a difference.
Mhm.
And I think Outlaws is missing a lot of that. Even though it doesn't like, there's not a lack of enemy types here or anything. Every faction has like their normals, their heavies, their elites, and whatnot that
Mhm.
make like fun combat scenarios. But they're just not super fleshed out. Like they don't do very many interesting things. Um, and it all I think kind of comes back to like the enemy AI is not great. Your toolkit is weird, and so you don't have access to things you might need. The controls are clunky. Like they're a little bit clunky in combat, especially where There's like a point of this game where you're having to dodge a big thing, and it does the classic like a big enemy is going to charge at you, and you need to move to the side. But there's not like a good way to do that in Star Wars Outlaws. Like you just you kind of just have to like point your camera and run
Mhm,
in a direction because you don't want to be strafing because you'll be too slow. And there's no
mhm.
like dodging in this game. There's nothing to move, and like sliding is clunky, so you can't really slide out of
There's
the
a
way.
roll.
There's a roll that's like weird to trigger. So
You have to double tap your crouch button,
yeah, it's just like a little
which is
weird.
not the most, yeah, not the most intuitive thing in the world. um, yeah, really, yeah, that's where it breaks down for me is the AI because I would be, because one thing that you may hear is there's not like a lot of upgrades for K's blaster. There's not a lot of like combat options, which I don't really agree with.
Yeah,
I
I
think
don't agree with that either. I think the blaster was totally fine.
I think because there's three different upgrades for the blaster. There's like your standard shot, there's a rapid shot, and there's another one that you get from a character later on. You have your ion shot, which has three different types of there's like a burst and there's like a charged one, that kind of thing, which breaks shields. And then you have your power shot, which is one that shoots grenades essentially. And there's a good amount of options there, I think.
Yeah, I
And
think the
also.
problem for most of them is just like I think that for a lot of them it's going to be very clear which one you want to use.
Mm,
At least for me, especially with the power shot. Once I had access to the one that was in like AOE blast, I never used any of the other options ever
mhm.
because it just felt
I
worse.
used it for a lot of my playtime. I wanted to try something different because it felt too similar to grenades, and so I
Yeah,
wanted to like vary up the kit a little bit. So the charge shot was a lot of fun. Um, and then I think the other thing too, if you're someone who's playing this game currently and you feel like the combat's getting very repetitive, one thing I would suggest is really use Nyx as much as possible because he can create these really cool moments. There's like a moment where I went into the adrenaline, Red Dead Redemption, Deadeye mode and just like
yeah,
shot a bunch of people. And then I like tossed a grenade at another group of people. And then I scooted into cover just as Nyx came around the corner with a blaster that he brought over for me that I could use. And it just, he really can make some cool moments. And I think adds a lot of like d dynamic moments to a combat encounter. It's just again, once you start running into how limited the AI can be, it's infuriating because it's like, oh, we're so close. We're so close.
yeah, yeah.
um,
I think that that goes for a lot of the game. There's like just there's a lot of things here that feel like had they had a little bit more time or a
mhm,
little bit more thought put into these things, this would have come out hitting like that 8 or 9 territory that
yeah.
they were looking for.
One has to wonder because the exclusivity deal with EA ended 2, 3 years ago. No, more than that. I forget how long, but they only have so much time to develop a game based on, oh, we can develop a Star Wars game now. Plus Massive was working on Avatar at the same time. So
Yeah, and I
I
believe
do
they're also
wonder.
working on Division 3.
Yes,
Um,
yes. So one has to wonder if this was like one of the projects that got lost in the weeds of working on essentially three different
yeah, so we
projects at
know
the same
Heartland got
time.
canceled
Mhm,
not too long ago, which was another Division thing. I think it was like a Division 2 big update or something, but
mhm,
yeah, Massive is doing a lot, and I think this has come out very well for that. But there's been like a reaction to this game that is very strange to watch because people are very people are immediately taking sides with Outlaws in a weird way,
mhm.
like a way that I don't think I've seen since like Cyberpunk
Yeah.
coming out. And it's very strange because this game is like this is not a game worth having such strong opinions on in either direction. I think. Like, with the exception that like I did really enjoy this overall, and I think it is a lot of the time not being given a chance because of there's this whole drama about Kay's looks, and that's I don't want to touch that with a 10 foot
Okay.
pole.
I
So
I I almost don't want to in this, in this discussion we're having. I'm just gonna say if if your primary concern with a video game is that the character that you play as is unattractive, get a life.
or go play Black Desert. You know, you've got options. I think you've got options.
Go
Uh,
play. Go play. Go play Dead or Alive or something. I
Though
don't
I will
know.
say
Just like
that does bring me to a legitimate issue with the game, which is facial animation.
yes,
Is
terrible, awful,
across the board really bad, which is so bizarre.
shocking, shockingly
And
bad.
there's like two or three scenes in the whole game where you'll like take note. Oh, like I can see facial expressions. Like Kay looks like she's
Well,
emoting.
those are during pre-rendered like cutscenes where they're
There's one
not.
or two in the game as well where I think they like
Mhm.
facial captured somebody and it looks okay, but for like everything else, it's not good.
Thank God, I forget the voice actress's name off the top of my head, but she kills it. She does a great job, and so her performance kind of shines through the really bad facial animations, and I feel like that helped keep me in the story because otherwise, man,
Yeah, like it
it
was
is
mostly safe because I'm not
bad.
looking at her generally when she's talking. There's like a lot of other things happening in most
Yeah,
of the scenes, so it's not like
yeah,
you're paying hyper close attention to it, but it can be a problem. And it's just
yeah.
weird. It's weird because like Ubisoft has like backslid in the facial animation territory.
Well,
Uh,
animations in general, I think I've mentioned this before, but they used to have the best character animations of any AAA studio I've ever seen. Go back and play the original Watch Dogs or Assassin's Creed, Black Flag, like that era, they had
Black
incredibly
Flag
like
especially.
subtle they had incredibly subtle and detailed character animations. There were these really neat very character specific movements or like
Like Black
changes in
Flag is a
posture.
game. Having played that relatively recently as well, you can like read emotions on people in a way that you cannot in their newer stuff.
Yeah. And I would
Um,
say in terms of overall character animations, this is better than something like the more recent Assassin's Creed games, which I feel like just have very, very
they're very flat. Yeah.
very flat. This I would say fares better. I wouldn't say it fares, it's not as good
I
as
would
it used
honestly
to be,
say,
but
having been playing a little bit of Valhalla, I think the main story fares worse, but the rest of it fares a little bit better. And that
yeah.
Valhalla during the main story, you can tell that they like mocapped most of the animation, and it looks
Mhm.
pretty good, but the side stuff looks just as bad as Outlaws does. Outlaws just seems like it uses the actual, mocapping and more closely done facial capture very rarely,
Mhm.
um, and it stands out for sure because of that. And there's characters you don't notice it on because Star Wars, you're talking to a lot of aliens with not mouths, so it's fine in those cases. But when Kay is speaking and the camera like focuses on what she's saying, she has like dead eyes. Her face is doing a weird thing where it like doesn't move aside from the lips, and it's very strange. And
Yeah.
that I think is what has caused a lot of people to rile this up, is that they're like going after Kay's facial model for a weird reason or something.
Yeah.
Um,
It yeah, I don't understand the fixation on it at all. It's the other, and it kind of leads to another thing that I've seen where I don't know how the narrative started that this game, like overall, in terms of visuals and presentation, is bad because that is just blatantly untrue. Like there are blemishes such as facial animations, but like overall, like especially the environments look amazing.
yeah, the
Like
environments here are
incredibly
very very high bar. I would say they're excellent across the board. Um,
incredibly highly like detailed, especially the cities where they're so densely packed with people and interesting looking
yeah,
vendors and like little street food stands and stuff. It overall, like again, blemishes here and there, but overall it's a very impressive looking game. I don't know how that narrative started because it's wild. Through YouTube compression everything looks worse if you're looking at a trailer or something, but
yeah,
in person, it looks great. I would say the only you played on PC, I played on PS5. The one issue I do have is they over sharpen things a lot in performance mode.
yeah,
If there's a lot of water or clouds or like really tall grass, it gets very shimmery,
yeah. I'll
which
say that's
can
the same
definitely
thing
be an
happens on
issue.
PC if you're using any other frame solutions like DLSS or whatnot. It seems like they've got a weird handling of like water and volumetrics with that.
Mhm.
They look very strange. It
I but
isn't
I
super distracting, but there's bits where you're like over a lake and whatnot. It just looks very weird with like sunlight doing
mhm.
this weird shimmer.
But I don't agree that this is a bad looking game or a game that should have come out X amount of years ago. I
You know, I
don't
would
agree with
honestly say
that
Ubisoft
at
tends to
all.
hit a pretty high bar on environmental design, and this
Yeah.
absolutely is at that bar, if not much better than it in most cases. I think this is like excellent stuff here.
Well, it's part of what sells that Star Wars fantasy is that they
Yeah,
got the Star Wars stuff right. Like especially, I think their crowning achievement in terms of their town design. We're already in it. Miragana looks phenomenal.
especially
Like
because
A
Miragana is
plus
like a
effort.
not a known city. Like the rest of the stuff,
Mhm.
Akiva you get to later is not like also not a really like particularly known place, but it's an
Tashara was
aesthetic.
their planet. Tashara was
Yeah,
their planet. That's their original planet. Like every like Miragana, all of the planes and
yep.
everything. Like that's a planet that they were able to make themselves, which they
And I
seem
think that
very excited
shows.
about.
Yeah.
It looks fantastic. Yeah. Kind of has like a I think their inspiration was like the African desert, and it looks s- fantastic with this cool like volcanic rock that shoots up from the ground and a smattering of like multicolored plants and stuff. Looks fantastic.
Yeah, and I mean, we've complained about Tatooine before being every Star Wars thing feels like it needs to have a dusty sand desert. At least Outlaws had the respect to use the real one, and not come up with their
Right.
own, and
So my
it
thing
is a
is,
good, well done rendition of Tatooine.
it's a good, well done rendition of Tatooine. It is. I think I'm not impressed by it as much because we've just seen Tatooine in so many different Star Wars things. And the thing that pisses me off about it is that it's supposed to be remote, out of the way. No one goes to Tatooine because it's a shithole. Like that's the whole point. That's why Luke wants to leave in A New Hope to begin with. And the fact that we keep coming back to it seemingly with every bit of Star Wars like show, movie, whatever that we get, just it aggravates me to
With
no
the
end.
exception
I
that
will
if
say
anything is going to use it, it's going to be Outlaws because you're dealing with the Hut Syndicate
that's
or the Hut
that's the
Cartel
thing
for the
is
majority
that
of it.
the excuse of it being in this game is not a bad excuse. It's just we've gotten so much of it leading up to this point that I'm just not like whatever. I don't care. Not really the game's fault. It's just all of the Star Wars media that's come
Yeah.
out before it, you know. But it is really well done. You can go see. I don't know if you went to go see it, but there is Luke's farm.
Yep.
Um, as soon as I saw that you could go to Tashi Station, I was like, "Hold up, where is it?
Hold up. Where'd you
It's
put
here.
it?
It's here."
Um, yeah,
um,
I think it's really well handled here. I'm
mhm.
not as jaded on Tatooine as Wyatt is, so I think it's actually, I think that I would have been disappointed if this game didn't have Tatooine as opposed to the other way around.
I would
The
have been
sequel
fine.
doesn't need it if we get one, but I think this one absolutely did.
No, they're gonna have another planet that we all know and love in there somewhere.
If we go to Jakku, I'm gonna be really disappointed. uh,
Um,
yeah, I think overall, like coming out of this game, I'm really happy having spent the time to play it. I think this is a really good time. I think the mission design is generally good, especially in the final missions. I think they're a lot of
if
fun.
it's good if a little samey. I wish there
Yeah,
was more, especially in the main story. I wish there was more
because like my
variety.
suspicion is that they realized their sandbox wasn't working as well as they hoped, and so they stopped using it. I think legitimately that's
Mm.
what happened is they stopped encouraging you to do the like sandbox kind of infiltration thing, and instead you're kind of following more linear like Uncharted-y sections.
Which
Not that
is a
there's
shame
anything wrong with
because
those, but it's like you have this interesting toolkit that the game gives you. Granted, it doesn't work as well as you would hope, but I
well,
do
and
think
it's
it's fun
kind
to
of a
use.
shame because they do have some interesting stealth setups. I love that they have these little like platforms, these like mobile
Yeah.
platforms that move containers around if you're in an Imperial base and you can activate it and kind of walk alongside it as it's moving for this cool little stealth moment. Um, I will say, don't know if you noticed this, there's a lot of crawling around vents. Like a
Oh, there's
lot
a
of
lot of
crawling
crawling
around
around vents.
vents.
Look,
to,
I'm
to
kind
a
of into
degree
it.
where it was, I mean, it didn't really bother me. It felt very like scoundrel-y, but there's a lot of vent crawling.
Hey, but at least they had like 20 different vent tile sets. Why? There's so
That's
many different
true.
vents for you to
That
explore.
is that is true. To
Um,
give them credit.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd say like the biggest problem with event stuff is it's slow, and there are times where you need to
yeah.
go through a lot of them, and they're like
Yes.
lengthy, slow sections, which is not great, especially because your like stealth toolkit is not as interesting as like a Metal Gear, so you're not doing the thing of like, oh, I put a thing at this entrance, it's gonna draw the guards there, because you can't. There's nothing you can do that will do that outside of like, if you're in visual range, you can send Nyx to distract a person, multiple if you have a thing, but yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely feels limited. And I'm curious if you're going to agree. One of the other problems I have with this game, and this one is more subjective, I think, and not a thing that's going to bother everybody, but I do think there are too many characters. I
Mm.
think because they do have
Hmm.
this whole system where like vendors are aligned with the factions, and so you go to the faction vendors, and they each have like a little bit of story, like a very minor couple of lines, and then you have these contract brokers. Some of them will have a mission. A lot of them don't, and they're just there to give you contracts. I really wish they had just like cut everything that didn't have a quest related to it or something, and just
Mm.
like because there's one or two brokers like Alira for Crimson Dawn here and Dart for Crimson Dawn somewhere else. Like it's like Crimson Dawn gets a lot of them, the ones that were more interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, where you actually get like a side mission that is related to that character and not just the faction thing, and I think that's more interesting. um and it's weird when like am having to go find like a bunch of different brokers, and a lot of the time they have really cool character designs. Like
Mhm.
Varric comes to mind as like the Hut Cartel representative on Toshara, who's like
The one
hanging
that
out in a
gets the
dingy
most,
bar,
yeah,
but
the
he
one that
doesn't
gets the
have
most
any
attention
interesting going on.
is Donka, which I loved her design. Her voice actor was great.
Yeah.
I loved her like introduction to all of the clans. It was like a two-sentence explanation, but you just understood what these different syndicates are about right away. But I agree, there's a lot of like, why is this broker here? Like
Like,
I
I
think
really
they
wish they would have
wanted.
focused in on each planet having one interesting broker, and then
Mhm.
maybe the faction ones are like done through that broker, or they're intentionally not as interesting, right?
Mhm.
Because I think there's a real issue here with just like the characters show up and have an introduction and then never get mentioned again. And I
Yeah.
think that happens a lot where you get like characters get a cool introduction and then never talk about anything again.
Yeah.
And yeah, because there's a whole expert system too, and I think that has the same problem of you meet experts and you unlock skills functionally,
Which is a system I really enjoyed.
which is a
I'll
very
throw that
cool
out there.
thing. Like I do like how it
Mhm.
works, and I like that they're related to characters, but I miss like having some interaction point of like, oh, you learn this thing from the expert, right? Like it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
strange that I don't go back to the innkeeper that you have at the start of the game, Bran. He is like the first couple of skills you get are from him, but you don't talk to him again. Like, there's not a thing to go ever do like a thing for him. It's just in the menu you unlock it.
One of the only
Um,
there's a few moments, the expert that you talk to for your speeder wants you to come back for some reason to like show you something
yeah,
that unlocks something for your speeder. And then, oh, what's her name? The like gunslinger who's the sheriff in
Quinn, I
that
think.
Tatooine. Yes, thank you. She like invites you to a high roller sabacc table. And I just needed more stuff like that because the most
Yeah.
interesting part of it was doing missions that involved those specialists. Like the slicer specialist has a whole mission where you have to like help her out of a jam. And that was actually kind of fun.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's like I agree where like they have a lot of characters and then they don't really, it's very like surface level kind of characterization.
I think the
And
way
then
to put
it's
it is like
like,
when I think of what characters had arcs in this game, it's like it's K and ND5. That's really it. I don't think any of the other characters really had an arc. Aside from like
not,
maybe one or two of the main cast that we aren't
yeah.
talking about yet for spoiler reasons. But I do think there are like there's and nothing involved in the open world part of the game ever changed in a meaningful way. I would say like at no point did I get an interesting like storyline involving a character that was cool or whatnot. And this is like
Mhm.
a problem that I think Ubisoft started having in Valhalla, where they started doing their like quests and whatnot in a different way, where they would be a little bit more like world quests rather than an actual storyline, and then they would put all the storyline stuff in one hub. This game doesn't have a hub like that, so you don't have like these extra story missions. You generally just have contracts in your main story and your expert related stuff.
Well, you should have your hub. It should be your ship, but
It
it
should be your
doesn't
ship.
act like a hub.
It
It's
doesn't act
very
like a hub.
strange.
Uh,
Very strange.
but like I want a calm call from someone telling me, hey, I got in a jam and I need your help, and then we get like an interesting mission or something. And that doesn't really happen unless you've initiated the mission already through like some thing that you did. Which is weird because they have this whole like intel system that's pretty cool, where you like learn bits of intel and that will like lead you to random things. Maybe it's like a cache of items. Maybe it's an expert that will teach you more skills. Maybe it's a thing, and like that I really like that. But
Mhm.
at no point will that lead you to a thing that is actually like content. Generally, outside of like experts, sometimes have one mission that you do
It's
for them.
Well, I think it's almost an admission from Ubisoft because they're very like systems and world design first over there.
Yeah,
Because their narratives a lot of the time, their stories conform to their like sandbox. And so I think by having missions that are more about the sandbox and the world that you're in versus it's a good example of the weird stealth right there.
yeah. I mean, it's this is the problem because
But
the sandbox doesn't work as well.
yeah.
So I think that's where it doesn't feel as great because like this almost I think would have benefited more from being more linear. Like the
Mhm.
open worlds are
I
cool
agree.
and interesting, and you don't have to do anything different with that system. But I think for the storyline stuff, there's just a lack of actual through lines and anything that isn't the main story. And even then, the main
Yeah.
story is a little disjointed because of the whole 3 act separation that's kind of like non-linear middle.
It the relationship that Kay has, so her arc and then her relationships with Nyx and ND carry the story. Like just hard carry the
Yeah,
story. At least it did for me.
no,
Anything
I agree
outside of that
for sure.
felt incredibly underbaked. Definitely.
And
I
even
think in
then,
the
Indy 5
future.
feels a little underbaked because it
Mhm.
feels weird that you've got him sitting in your ship for the entire game, and
Yep.
at no point does he do an interesting thing outside of story missions. You don't get to do like I drag him out, except for that pre-order mission where he comes and does a thing with you.
Which feels, yeah, not great. Not
Yeah,
good.
it was very
Um,
strange.
but yeah, it's I think that what defines this game's like the downsides of the game more so than the actual flaws for me is like the missed opportunities
Yeah,
that it had. Like it's
it almost
so much
shares
of
the
this
same
of
problem
the
as Final Fantasy 15, except the baseline here is much higher. Like
yes. I didn't
I
want to
think the
throw my
baseline
controller
here
across the room when I
the
played this
the
game.
baseline of storytelling here is that the ending, like the through line of the main story, is pretty solid and generally very good the whole way through.
Mhm.
Because like one of the other lines that people have been saying a lot about this is that they didn't love the main story. I kind of disagree. I actually think this has a really solid main story.
Well, there's a
Um,
general consensus that the third act pulls everything together, which isn't
yes,
untrue. Which isn't untrue, but I've with that I've also heard a lot of people saying like, "Oh, nothing happens in the middle chunk," which isn't true. I think there's a lot of empty space in the in that
there's
kind
a lot
of
of lack
second
of
act.
interaction, which is what we were talking about earlier. Like,
But the third act wouldn't work if there wasn't some solid stuff set up in that second act, which I
yeah, it
think
feels
they
like if they
gave me
needed
just
effort
enough.
anywhere, they just need more in that middle bit because the middle bit
Mhm.
is the majority of the game.
The beginning
Um,
fine, sets things up mostly fine. Not anything amazing, but it gets the job done. Middle chunk feels very like empty. What is there is good, but there I think in the future there needs to be more. And then the third act does kind of tie things
yeah, pull
together.
everything together.
Mostly, with a few exceptions that I want to rant about
Yep.
afterwards. But
Speaking of which, I think we're at the point where we're gonna start talking about story stuff. We've been going on about structure and whatnot.
Mhm.
So before we do, I want to briefly mention like bugs. I had some major bugs with this
I
game.
have a list. So
So I have a
go for
I
it.
had the Wyatt problem for this one, Wyatt. I'm gonna say a number of things. I didn't tell you about most of these because I think it's funnier for me to talk about them now. You might have seen in the
Mhm.
video a few things of like enemies getting stuck in walls and their legs
Yep.
flailing about. That happened a couple times. But I played this on PC, and the biggest issue that I had is this game would just randomly hard crash my entire PC.
Whoa.
So
Really?
it would generally happen after a couple hours. And I actually have looked this up. This is a problem that multiple people are having. And
Mhm.
it seems to be related to some like specific thing, some way this game interacts with CPUs that are overclocked. And I will say I did disable my CPU overclock, and it was more stable in this. But like I play tons of games on my PC. I've never had this problem with anything else. The closest thing I've had is like transient power spikes with Cyberpunk, which was also a known problem with that game, but that's solvable. And here, like I don't know what was causing this. I just haven't ran into one since I stopped my overclock from running, so I'm guessing it was related to that. But it was weird. Like nothing else I've played has caused that to happen, and it was very like predictable. It would happen after like 2 hours of playing the game. Every time it would be like, oh, I'm gonna hard crash, spit you out of the menu. And thankfully, like the game autosaves well enough. Like I never lost progress to that. But I did lose a bunch of video files, which is I don't have any video of the later portions of the game because it's kept happening. And Wyatt, I'm not gonna say what this is, but it happened in the final cutscene as well.
Oh
So it can't
no.
be related to like the game chucking hard because that's a pre-rendered cutscene.
Oh
So I don't know what's going on.
That is
But
unfortunate.
that was the major bug that I ran into, and it was like that happened repeatedly. That was like I would say I got like 8 or 9 crashes playing through the whole story because
Wow.
of that.
Okay.
Um,
I did so again, PS5, I got
yeah,
3 crashes. Nothing it didn't,
but it's enough that it's
mess with the whole
worrying, right?
PS5. Yes. Enough to where it's annoying, definitely. Um there's a lot of the things here seem like again another example of like this game was taken out of the oven a little too early. There are moments where one of the crew members you pick up shouldn't be in your ship, and then you do a mission, and then all of a sudden they're talking to you during a mission like they are on the ship, which was very odd.
Yeah,
Which is just like that's one of those things I feel like testers would have run into, and it feels like a relatively simple fix, especially because the dialogue that was there was not really important. It's not like they were completely changing the way that a side quest was
yeah,
going. It was just like a comment from one of the characters, which I thought was very strange. There were a lot of little things like you'll hear in the open world you'll hear like a imperial dispatcher saying like, oh, we're being attacked by pirates, like our supplies are being attacked by pirates or something like that. There are moments where in the story, if you're on your speeder bike and you like get off it for a second, or you're hit and you're flown off your speeder bike or something, Kay will be like, oh, give me 1 second, and then when she gets back on the bike
yep,
she'll be like, okay,
yep.
what were you saying? For
And then
some
the
reason
dispatcher responds.
dispatcher, which is so funny.
So
And
bizarre
again,
because
one
it's
of
meant to be
those,
her like listening into an imperial radio station or something, right?
yeah.
Like
So
not.
it's again, it's like, is it that big of a deal? No, but it is a sign of like this thing was taken out of the oven, needed
Yeah.
another 2 or 3 months or something.
That happens. I also have ran into multiple times tons of voice line overlap of like
Mhm.
Kay, especially on the speeder where you're moving
Yep.
and like doing a mission. Kay will have like a line and she starts talking and she's like other characters are responding, and then something else will happen that'll trigger another line that plays over the same line, and then Kay will stop that conversation and then have to like do the whole hey, sorry, what did I miss thing
Mhm.
to restart the conversation. But it's like repeated because of things going on, especially if like the kill squads are after you. So I had the
Yes.
pikes after me for a lot of this, and what would happen is I'd be doing a story mission. I would leave the story like thing, and they'd be having the finale conversation as you're like moving around, and a like kill squad would come find me, and then I'd get in the middle of a gigantic fight while this dialogue was going on, and just not hear it because the fight
Yeah.
would kill the dialogue essentially.
There's
And
there's
that's
a lot
unfortunate.
of there's a lot of weird like sequencing things that were very, I don't know if you ran into this. So you and I both played the game in the order that ND5 wants you to, aka the way the developers kind of intended it
Yeah.
to, right?
Though I
You
did
go
bounce around a
from
little bit. I didn't finish all of them in like one row,
okay,
but
okay. Well, I did. I was just like, I'm finishing up story missions on Tatooine, then I'm going to Akiva, right?
yeah.
There's sometimes like random interactions you can have with NPCs on planets, right? There's a moment where I'm on Akiva and there's an Akiva fortune teller, which, and it's clearly a grift, but like Kay is like, whatever, I'll entertain this person for a second. And she's like trying to tell your fortune, right? She describes a mission that already happened. So I'm like, okay, so clearly this was, you're supposed to play that other mission first, and then she's supposed to comment on something that you haven't done. And I just sequence broke it. And then I realized, wait a minute, if you're doing the way that the
The
developers
game
want you to do it,
suggested you to do it.
it still doesn't work.
It's very
Which is
strange.
it's just weird. It's just
Which, like,
very
what that says to me is I'm
strange.
almost wondering if the intention here was that you were gonna go to each planet to unlock your crew, and then the like full open worlds would all be available, and there would be like another beat before you actually moved into
Oh,
like the point of no
but
return.
well, and this mission was one that had to be at this time on this planet too. It was the Tatooine mission,
Oh,
if you
yeah,
know what I'm talking about. And she describes that. So it's like you this should already be done. Like
yeah,
it's
like
just
that's really
is
strange.
very odd. There's also, I don't know if you ran into this bug, another bug that I ran into on Akiva that has not been patched. And every time I go to Akiva, this happens, and I am so sick of it. There is a side quest where you make a bunch of like deliveries.
Yeah,
You have to deliver a bunch of packages. I don't know if you did that side quest or not. Um, what happens is when you finish all these deliveries, Kay says something like, "Oh, that's all the packages. Now it's time to get paid." Even though I have finished that quest, every single time I go back to Akiva, every single time a cutscene ends on Akiva, she says it every time, and it is infuriating. It's the same voice line every time, even though the like quest is already done, and it is like consistent. It
yeah.
drives me insane.
Well,
um,
yeah, buggy game. I think that's all we can say about that.
it's mostly bugs that, in my experience, don't completely ruin the game. I do know that there was a save
There was a
bug,
save bug during the early access period on PS5 specifically
which I
that
did not run into because I wasn't
they
part of
encourage
the,
people to delete their save and restart
which is
to
pretty crazy.
fix
But
like a
during
day
my,
later, which is wild.
but I will say during my time with the game, I didn't run into anything like that. It's just a lot of weird things that, to me,
The crashes were
like
pretty bad for me. Yeah, that was the
crashes
biggest
aren't
problem.
great. That's the biggest problem. But a lot of these other things are like, it's a little open world jank. Whatever,
Yeah, because
like
I
fix
do
it.
actually
But
want to pick up a copy of this at some point in the future,
Mhm,
and not just have it on the Ubisoft subscription,
mhm.
because I don't intend to keep that subscription. I think if I were to get a copy of this, I would get it on PS5 and not PC,
Sure.
because it definitely seems like it does not run as well, despite like
I will
looking great
say,
on PC.
I will say, the performance mode,
Kind of
eh,
iffy, yeah. Hey,
kind
but
of
that
iffy.
PS5 Pro, you know why you can fix it up yourself.
We're not going off on a PS5 Pro tangent in the
Yeah,
middle
we'll
of
save that
this.
for next week.
We're gonna save that for next week. But there are, before we move on to like spoiler specific stuff, there are a few things that I wanted to point out,
Yeah,
and get your take on. One thing, and this is another like thing that you're going to see around online, is that there's a lot of like, oh, it's another typical Ubisoft open world game. Skip. There is one thing I want to say, which is I think they actually, it seems it's kind of subtle, but I do think there's a different approach to the open world here than in a lot of other Ubisoft games. They've a lot of their games, and we complain about this every time. There's just map markers all over the place, and it
hmm
chokes the map, and it like climb a tower, and it reveals 15,000 different things. I think this game actually does a really good job of opening up the map to you in a very natural way, because it's only when you receive information about a specific thing that you have to go and track down. There's a lot of moments where you're listening to
yeah.
NPCs about a potential like really valuable blaster upgrade, and then it marks a spot on your map where that blaster upgrade might be. And I think that's a much better approach to like adding icons to your map and stuff. And it just
I
felt,
vastly prefer this. Yeah, I think this actually, the intel system and the map marking works really well.
it's well, and it's that thing of like it's not like, in some ways it is a typical Ubisoft open world game, but I think in a lot of ways they actually really
It
made an
does a
attempt
better
to
job
get
at
away.
filtering that information.
Mhm,
And the mini games are
mhm.
more worthwhile. I think that's a big one. Is like the side stuff feels a little bit more fun to
Let's
do.
let's talk about those mini games. Let's talk about Brian. Let's talk about Wordle.
About good old Wordle. Yeah,
Wordle.
you play Wordle the Slice. I don't know. I like it.
It's cute. It's fun, especially when you one
It's
of the
quick too, which
upgrades
is
that you
nice.
get.
Like I think
Yeah.
my comparison point here would be Starfield and the lockpicking. So both of these games
Mm,
have
yeah.
sci-fi lockpicking as mechanics. Uh, Outlaws has this neat like rhythm system. So it's basically like a
Yes.
very short rhythm mini game where it will repeat just a pattern 3 times, and if you have a DualSense, it'll actually like vibrates very slightly the trigger
Mhm.
when that happens, so you have like a good kind of feel for it in addition to the sound. Um,
Mhm.
and I found that to be much better than like the Starfield Digipick stuff, because Digipicking can take forever. It's like super
Yes.
lengthy minigame. This is always quick. Like it's always very fast. It can be a little bit challenging sometimes, but it never like forces you
Especially if you're
out.
like me and you can't really keep a rhythm all that well.
But the main thing is like when you're doing this, the people don't stop moving. So you can be in
Mhm.
a position where you're having to quickly do it to actually get through and finish, or else like you'll get caught and someone is going to spot you, and that's where the tension comes from, not from the
Mhm.
minigame being just super lengthy to do on your own. And I think
Mhm.
this is good. I really liked how they handled that.
Yeah.
Slicing is fun when you get
I do
all
know you
the
had some
upgrades for
issues
it.
with the way that they handled the like Wordle mini game. Um,
The Wordle stuff is a little weird, yeah, because I
yeah.
think there are scenarios where you can kind of lock yourself into a 50-50, and
Mhm.
that can be a little awkward, and then you have to redo it if you do. Uh, the Wordle stuff feels much better once you actually get the upgrades for it. Like I think
Yeah.
once you have a couple of the related things, it feels a lot more reliable to do.
Yeah. No, they're fun. It may seem kind of cheap that they just took Wordle and used it as a mini game, but to me, I think it's really cute, and I think
It's a little bit different. There's a
it's
couple things that are helpful
it's
of
a
like
mhm.
there's like
I think it's a
lines
mini
connecting
game.
them, so you know there's only one of the thing, and that line can be on the final
Which is
line.
interesting. It's like, do you just pick all four of the I did numbers and I think you did symbols, but like, do you pick all four of the numbers in that strain, or do you do like one or two and then move on to another one? So there's
Hmm.
some strategies that can develop there, which are kind of interesting. There's upgrades that you can get through the slicer expert, where you can kind of minimize the amount of like dud numbers that are in your list and stuff. So they spent a lot of time kind of developing that mechanic, which was fun.
Yeah.
Um, and then we talked about Sabak briefly. Um I do want to circle back around to it again because I think do you think there's a lot of like smoke and mirrors in terms of like we want this specific like player to get this pairing and this specific player to get this pairing while you're playing? Or do you think it's like it is just
I think it's a mix
random?
of both. So I
Mhm.
do think there is something going on. Like I think there is
Mhm.
a I think they almost designed them as puzzles and not as actual full Sabacc games, with the exception that I think if you just go sit down and play it, it is a random game. But there are definitely missions where you play Sabacc where I am almost certain they have like designed what hands are going around.
Yeah.
Especially because there are variants where you'll be given certain shift cards, and then you can like
Yes.
puzzle your way out of a scenario using cheats in that by like looking at what's going on. And I think they absolutely have done that in those scenarios, or we got exceedingly lucky and had the same experience. So
Yeah. Yeah. Which for like more story specific Sabak games, it doesn't bother me too much as long as it doesn't feel like it's holding your hand too much
yeah,
through
I
that
do kind of
that
wish they were
game.
clear if they were doing that or
Mhm.
not, because I think that would kind of shift the mindset of, oh, I need to look at this like a puzzle and not as a luck based
Yeah.
game
Yeah.
in certain scenarios. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I really enjoyed Sabak overall. Small thing, why aren't the Sabak tables labeled on your map at all? I had to go in, they give you a little like symbols to annotate the map. So I went in with a very specific symbol of like here's a Sabak table and here's a Sabak table. Small little thing. I just wanted to point that out as a very strange omission.
yeah, I get that.
Um, and then there was something else. I'm like a few last minute things before we like go into spoiler
Yep.
section. Um, there was one thing. So I talked with you about this going back to spaceship combat. There was one thing that I wanted to point out in terms of the feel that I think I'm trying to like figure out the thought process with it. So in a lot of space like there's kind of a couple of different controls that you can have for space combat, right? You kind of have your like dogfighting that you get in something like Star Wars Squadrons or House of the Dying Sun, that kind of thing. There's
Hmm.
also 6 Degrees of Freedom, which you get in something like Everspace 2. Um, And then there's also your like essentially naval style combat, which is in something like Rebel Galaxy or something like that. The system they have here is like a weird mix of like dogfighting and naval combat. And the reason I say that is because in naval combat, your speed is segmented into kind of different groups, usually like three or four, like
Yeah.
you're like slow speed, medium speed, high speed. And it's done, and it's that way because you're controlling this giant ship that you're kind of flying around. So it's meant to be clunky and slow. It's weird here because everything else about your control scheme feels very like dogfight style
Yeah, it all
combat,
feels like
and
Everspace, except
everything.
for like your throttle isn't a throttle in the
No,
proper way here. Like you
it's got
can't turn it back to move backwards, which is really weird. Like
well, it's not really. It's not 6 degrees of freedom. It's more dogfight where there's always
yeah,
constant
which is
forward motion,
very
which is
strange.
which I think
Because
does fit
there's a lot of
Star Wars.
scenarios where they have you like, I think if it's the combat, but there are scenarios where they have you like moving between areas in like a space station type thing that you
Mhm.
need like fine control over, and because you can't go backwards without like flipping your ship around,
Yeah,
uh, that puts you in some weird spots where like it doesn't really work in certain scenarios.
and the other strange thing is like all of the when you're in combat, it feels like they want you to do kind of dogfight, right? You're like flying around, you're
Yeah,
doing maneuvers and stuff, but your speed is segmented like it is in like a naval like control setup. So it makes the dogfighting feel very clunky because your speed is constantly shifting
it's
around and
moving weirdly, and there's also a
it
lot of
never
times
feels
here where
quite
you want
right.
to slow down, where like you're fighting. There are a couple of like larger ships in this game that
Mhm.
have like multiple things that you're not going to be able to do in like one approach pass, right?
Yeah.
So it feels really weird that in those scenarios you can't just slow down and like actually unload some missiles and then move on.
Yeah.
So it feels a little awkward. I do agree with that. I think they probably should have gone for a little bit more lean into the space part of that and less into the like clunky stuff that it has.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
There's also again just like going down the little things here. Swinging on your grappling hook felt very strange and I couldn't figure out if it was actually physics based or not or if it was just like a canned animation. It was very, very strange. Because I can only think of like one or two times where you use it in the whole game where you really have to build up momentum in your swing to actually like reach a
There were a few
ledge,
times
you
inside
know?
stuff. I ran into it a little bit more because I explored Akiva pretty heavily, and there were a few on Akiva
Mhm.
that had
Okay.
things that you had to do like that.
I do like the times that I remember doing it were on Akiva, which I found kind of interesting. And they
Yeah.
also this only worked about 50% of the time. Whenever I have a grappling hook like this, I want to jump off a ledge and then connect it in midair. And this game doesn't know how to handle that at all, in
Super
my
awkward.
experience. Very odd. So it never felt quite like natural. Like I was imagining in my head, like again, going back to the Uncharted comparison, like that feels so smooth. Like you can just hop in midair and it connects and then you can swing to wherever you want. Here
Yeah.
it's like kind of jankily works sometimes, but never quite felt right to me.
Yeah. I agree.
Um,
I
yes.
also think that comes with another problem a little bit that the game has of we talked about like the structure being a little nonlinear in the middle is kind of a problem for
Mhm,
the both the narrative, but I think it's also a problem for the gameplay here because you don't have like a gameplay progression of difficulty or like
mhm,
exploration difficulty progression in the way that you would of other things. It feels like they kind of flatlined the design of a lot of those things.
mhm.
Where like I would like to get some harder traversal challenges in the later parts of the game, or like more puzzly encounters because they do it very sparingly, and they're good when they do. So I wish they would do a little bit more of it, and less of the like linear, just move from point to point to solve these things. So
Which would have helped with variety as well,
yeah,
just having more. Because a lot of the puzzles come down to like you got to shoot the node thing to turn the light green, and then you can open the door. And it's like they have all the parts to make more interesting traversal or more interesting puzzles, and it just doesn't quite come together. And then the last major thing before we get into spoilers is space stations. So
yep,
there's four planets in this game, and there's only two space stations. And the first time I entered a space station, I was like, I didn't even know this was a thing in the game. This feels so cool. You could just land on the space station in a hangar, and then there's like a little parlor, and you can play a Sabacc game and stuff. And then I realized that's it. There's like a couple missions that incorporates going to like Ren Poly Station and that kind of thing, but that's
They
kind of
functionally
it.
don't need to exist. Yeah.
I was like, maybe if they had like all of the like space specific like broker like contract missions, that would have been kind of neat, or just something more going on. But I felt like it was kind of a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I definitely
Um,
wanted more space stuff. I think like one of the funnest missions in the early game, which is one that you guys have seen playing in the background as footage, is the mission you go to an Imperial station and just do like a little break in, and it's very fun because like
mhm,
there's a lot of cool environmental elements there. It looks great. Like the Imperial space station design is brilliantly cool.
mhm.
It reminds you so much of the movies. They do a fantastic job of that. I wish there was more of that stuff. Like I want to go be on a dingy space station.
It definitely felt like they weren't super confident with their like space stuff, and so they didn't want you to do it too much outside of like
Yeah.
contracts and stuff, which is a shame because I think it's actually not terrible. I think it's fairly solid, especially once you start getting more of your move set and some of your upgrades and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that that also kind of leads me into like our mini conclusion before we get to spoilers, which is I think it's a game that has a lot of questionable or some questionable design choices, a lot of kind of missed opportunity with
Yeah.
the amount of potential that's here. But I also think it's a game where, because it seems like we've been kind of harsh on a lot of it, I think this is such a good example of more than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
I think that's one of the best ways to categorize it because if you
Because
break
there's a
things
lot of like
down,
really obvious problems, but none of those problems are that bad generally, and the stuff that's good more than makes up for it. Like there is a feeling here if you're a Star Wars fan that I don't think any other game is going to give you, even other Star Wars games.
Mhm.
That this like feels like you're just part of the world, and a
Well,
lot
you
of
know
that is
what?
that like we don't have to deal with fucking Force.
I listen, Jedi's are cool, all right? It's kind of the backbone of Star Wars is the Force and the Jedi and all that. I'm so sick of it at this point.
I'm
I
just really
want
glad that we had like a story where like just don't go into this game expecting the story to ever be about Jedi, Sith, and all that jazz because it won't. And that's I don't think that's a spoiler at all to say. I think it's just like go in expecting this to be a very character focused, like fun outlaw-y romp in Star
yeah.
Wars, and you're gonna get that. And I
Yeah.
think that's gonna be what people like about this a lot.
I think if you just take this game's individual elements, right? It's like, oh, the combat has a lot of issues, the stealth has a lot of issues, the structure has a lot of issues. I think that the secret sauce to this game and the secret sauce to a lot of Ubisoft games is that they have a lot of mechanics, they have a lot of systems that feel maybe like underbaked or didn't go quite as far as it could have, but it's wrapped in some really fucking cool systems that elevates everything. Like
Yeah.
the the reputation system and
It's like it's
the
really simple,
experts.
but it works really well.
Yeah, the experts and the reputation system is so intertwined with everything else that you're doing that it kind of elevates what otherwise might be systems that don't work particularly well on their own. I think you can have fun with combat. I think you can have good stealth moments. And I think a lot of that is because of the rewards that are attached to that. Like
Yeah.
I want to invade, I want to sneak into this pike like location to get this blaster upgrade or to get this thing for an expert. Like it really does propel you through some of the rough patches in this game, and it's something that's really difficult to show, to like feel and to show by
Mhm.
just watching gameplay, which is why I feel like the game has had a bit of a hard time
This is a
because
good
it's kind
flow
of
to the game, despite
it
like
does.
the issues that we've mentioned. It does, and I think part of that is that there's not a lot of bloat here. Like there is a lot to do if you want to do
Mhm.
it, but it's not shoved in your face like it is in most of the Assassin's Creed games, where you've got 40 map markers popping up on your screen every time you enter an area,
Where
going
it
go do
becomes
this, go do
nothing.
that.
It
Yeah,
becomes meaningless, just
you
gunk.
tune all of it out because it's just nonsense. And like for this game, you are generally focused on one thing at a time, and you can like if you want to find stuff, you open your map and you look for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's more
I
successful.
Well, it's a good example of like I've said this for years, like they really need to slim down their projects. Like they Ubisoft games just like balloon in scope and like content. And I've been saying for years that like if they really shrink things down, like a lot of their cool ideas and their good designed instincts tend to shine through a lot more. Like another good
Yeah,
example of that, I mean, we got The Lost Crown earlier this year, which is fantastic,
extremely good.
so good. And even in terms of open world games, I mean, Immortals Phoenix Rising was a very like stripped down Ubisoft open world game, and you could just feel like the design coming through a lot more when there isn't so much gunk in the way. um, Overall, I think it's like such a good example of a 7 out of 10, and even approaches 8 sometimes, which makes it more frustrating sometimes. But
Yeah, for sure.
um, I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. I definitely did have a blast.
All right. That said, let's get into spoilers because I do want to talk about the story of this game because there's some interesting
Mhm.
stuff here. So
Okay.
this is your warning if you don't want to be spoiled on the story, and I think our recommendation is to play this game. So
Mhm.
if you haven't played it, you don't want to hear about the story yet, tune out now, come back when you finished it, and we're going to talk about everything because we are going to spoil the entire game. So, all right, let's jump into it, Wyatt. That's our warning. Y'all had your time.
This is on you. This is not on us. Um, yeah. So I think as I said earlier, I think the story gets off to a fine start. Like
Yeah.
gets what it needs to out of the way. Again, it's that weird structure of like first act, second act, and then like third act.
Because I think the thing that the first act does well is it establishes the idea that Kay is in over her head. She's really bad at lying
And
in a
she
very
doesn't
endearing
like other
way.
people. She doesn't
And
like
she
other
doesn't like other
people.
people because they keep betraying her constantly at every
Well, it's
turn, and you see
also
that.
it's I think like the glue that kind of holds this one of the aspects of the glue that keeps the game together is she does have this arc of like her mother who kind of raised her to be very similar to her as like a street rat roguish type character is like trust no one, like everyone's out to get you, do everything on your own, and that's been kind of ingrained into her brain since she was a child. And I think one of the best, what I really liked early on was when Waka betrays you. It kind of like ingrains that mindset more, and it kind of
Yeah.
introduces you to this kind of cutthroat world that you're a part of that you don't quite understand. And then over the course of the game, as she gets her crew, as she kind of grows closer to ND, and Nyx is, is there's a really great mission with Nyx as well. She kind of opens up to people, and that's kind of her arc. And I think for the most part, again, everything feels a tiny bit underbaked in this game. For the most part, done pretty well.
Yeah. I would actually say, like, by the end of this game, I really was invested in K, Nyx, and ND5. I think more so than any other Ubisoft game in recent memory. And I was invested in the
Yeah.
main cast here. And
That's
I think
always
that's a really
been
good thing.
that's always been in terms of like the complete Ubisoft package, it's always been their weakest aspect to me for a long time. They need better writers. I think Far Cry has good moments. The newer Far Cry games have like good moments or some good characters in there, but it just never quite like
Fully,
coalesces.
yeah.
But I think this is, and while it's not perfect writing, it's not, anything like out of this world amazing. I think it's the most solid writing that we've seen from them in a
And I think
long
it fits
time.
in the tone of Star Wars very well. I think that's
Yes.
sort of what kind of comes up with any issues in the writing are very easily like attributable generally to just like the setting this is in and whatnot. There's gonna be oddities when you're like, when someone's shouting Dank Farrik, it's gonna come off a little weird, and that's okay.
Carabas.
I do also think a real big benefit that Outlaws has is it is a complete story. I do think there's a little bit of sequel bait. There's just a little bit of sequel bait, but who knows if we'll get that or not. Generally, I think this is a really solid, like, actual complete story that Ubisoft is telling because we almost never get those from them.
Nope.
It's exceedingly rare to get a finished, like, proper thing, and I am
Yeah.
very glad that we did, because I think they've done a really good job here at constructing this. I think the biggest thing is, like, there's just a lack of interesting things in the middle that are with your whole crew, because it really feels like
Yeah.
you go from I got my crew to okay into the game at a certain point.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed. Agreed.
I do like all of the
Um,
characters that you interact with. I think Waka is a great introduction because he's got a
mhm.
really interesting character design. He's got like a cool way of speaking, and then he betrays you immediately and dies to someone else who was also about
Well,
to betray you.
what's
So
what's interesting about that betrayal is that he's not like, oh, I'm secretly working for the Pikes or the Crimson Dawn, and it's that no, 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 it's none of that. He just genuinely seems like obsessed with the ship,
yeah, he's a ship nerd.
which
He
I
wants your
thought
ship,
was.
and Zarek Besh, they want you.
And
So
he doesn't feel like you treat the Trailblazer that well, and I thought that was a nice touch. And again, it ingrains that like trust no one other than Nyx essentially.
yeah,
Um,
which works great because then you get
mhm.
introduced to ND5 and Jalen. You're like two sort of ever-present characters aside from Kay and Nyx, which
Balin comes in every now and then through
yeah,
holotapes.
he's like the patron character
Mhm.
who look. We all know he's going to betray you immediately. I don't think anyone sees Jalen and goes, "That dude's trustworthy."
That's a trustworthy guy. Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
I think everyone calls that betrayal immediately, and
Yep.
that's fine because the whole game is kind of built up as you kind of expecting it, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
I do think we get into some really interesting story stuff later on.
Mhm.
Jumping through like Ankh and Gadik's sort of crew missions because we don't have a crew member on Tatooine.
Mhm.
We sort of
Which
like
was really cool, actually. I
yeah, because I
love
actually
that.
loved the whole arc with Haas because Haas is a piece of shit.
The whole way through, and you think, oh, he's going to be a piece of shit, but with a heart of gold.
Yeah,
No,
what would he?
he's just
No,
an
he just
asshole,
sucks.
which
He's a
is great.
sucky guy.
I'm wondering, like, I go back and forth on this because they have you go to Tatooine second if you follow the order
Yeah.
that he wants you to do. I'm almost like, is that better second, or do you save that for last? Because you want to build up the oh, we got to get the crew.
Yeah, honestly, I think
Um,
my suggestion would be to save it for last. In a
mhm,
weird way, not just because of that, but because Vale is involved. And I
mhm,
think she is not important again until the end of the game. So
mhm.
there's like a weird intersection where it doesn't feel super important. And I also think Akiva. So my guess here, there's a moment where the game spoiled itself for me. I've talked to
Mhm,
Wyatt about this,
mhm.
where it let me know the final ending twist very just oddly as like a character
Yeah,
line from ND5.
yeah.
And I was like, huh. And I think the reason it did that is because I did Akiva last, and then I stayed on Akiva and didn't do any other mission. I didn't continue the main story while I did some other stuff. And it seems like it treated me as if I had beaten the main story for a little while,
Which is very weird.
which is very strange. Really weird bug. And yeah, very strange. I think that probably would be less likely to happen if I had done Akiva before I had done Tatooine and had
Mhm,
a clear thing that was like, oh, you haven't done the rest of this, so it probably wouldn't have triggered the like finale starting thing. So
mhm.
that's my suspicion is that like once you get that finale thing, I actually think they want you to immediately do the end and not wait. Because I also got every time I landed on Akiva after that point without finishing the game, I would get the line about Kay not trusting her mother repeatedly and like every single time, and it would be the same line every time I exited the
Yep.
ship. And it's a lengthy conversation too, so
Yeah.
I remember a
Yeah.
lot of that. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think your crew members are really strong characters. Haas is a piece of shit who dies and deserves it.
It's
And
great.
that's really just
It's great.
funny, especially because
Mhm.
it's not Kay's fault. it's
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
just he just gets eaten by a thing.
Well, it's great because like with the other two characters, you have to try and convince them to join your crew because they're always in the middle of
Yeah,
whatever they're doing. Whereas Haas is like, no, I'm good, let's do it, and then he just turns out to be a piece of shit that sells Nyx to Jabba the Hutt.
yeah. And that ends in a Rancor fight, as we all would suspect it does. And it's okay. It's not
Which
the best thing, but
I will say you're caught directly after the Rancor, so the entire Rancor fight and trying to escape was ultimately kind of pointless, outside of Jabba being like, that was a good show, I'm just gonna let you go for free. Which I guess is a fairly Jabba thing to do, but it felt like you were really stretching trying to find a
No,
way
it
for you
was
to fight
look,
the
Jabba was
Rancor.
gonna he respected you, and now you have to go do a mission to prove that he should respect you at all and not just feed you to the Rancor again.
Also,
Um,
if you think about it, the Rancor you fight is also the same Rancor that Luke ends up fighting.
yeah.
Ugh, reference, isn't that cool?
I love how far you had to reach for that.
I mean, that's what they're implying, though.
That is their implication. I don't think they really care though. At no point did I go, "Oh, this is a hand wavy reference." I think they just wanted you to do some cool Jabba stuff. Because when are you gonna do it if not with an Outlaws game?
That one mission, I will say, as much as I'm making fun of it, was one of the highlights.
Yeah,
Just
it was
because
great.
I think the gameplay and the narrative, it's like one of the few times where those really like come together. I think because Nyx, your buddy, which Nyx is a good example of a character that works narratively because he's also helping you throughout your entire journey.
Yeah,
It's
because
the
we
same
should
thing.
mention like we were talking about Haas being the start for that mission, but in reality,
Mhm.
the idea is that Haas sold Nyx to Jabba, and
Yeah,
the blood rage that I felt upon
yeah.
hearing that.
It's
If the
it's a
game
moment
gave me,
where
I pressed the right trigger in repeatedly during that scene when Kay was holding her pistol. I was like, "Let me do
give
it,
me the
game."
option. Yeah, no, it's a good example. It's very similar to it reminds me of like Atreus in God of War, right? Where like you have a character that not only narratively
Yeah,
works just from writing and their involvement in the story, but also they're an active part of the
you have
gameplay,
a
which
mission
makes
without
you
them, and now you feel it actively.
yeah, and it's a stealth mission. It is a pure stealth mission
Which is
without
Nyx
Nyx,
is
and
like your
you're like,
most useful tool for stealth.
yeah,
So yeah, I think it's super fascinating, especially because like when you don't have Nyx, you can't do the ping thing that every Assassin's Creed like game lets you do. So you just
yep,
gotta rely on your sight and like
yep,
your
yep,
hearing to make sure that you
and
aren't walking into an ambush.
you can't distract enemies, you can't sabotage like alarm panels, you can't grab things or like pickpocket. You got to just do it. You can't
Yeah,
send out nicks, which is great.
absolutely.
Um,
I think that was super fun. I like the whole Tatooine segment. I think it was very well done for the most part.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I think Ank is a very fun character. Talk about one of the other crew members. For
Mhm.
me, she was the first one that I got,
Same, same.
on Kajimi, and I think she is super fun as just
Mhm.
the explosive thing. I do wish we had an actual bit more of dialogue with her at some point, because she seems really interesting from the like 4 conversations you have with her.
Yeah, they give her a little bit of like she had a husband and they loved like doing adventures and like missions together and stuff. And I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere, and then it just stops after that,
Yeah,
which
that's
was
where I
really
go. I
disappointing.
need an Ank loyalty mission, Wyatt. I really
Yeah,
feel it in my bones that I need that.
this
Because
little
I
this
feel like
little
Gadik
creature.
kind of got one with your because your Gadik missions are a little bit longer. Though
Yeah.
I would still love another one with him, but I do think like that's the sort of part of the story that failed for me. Is just I think you needed another 1 or 2 missions once you had gotten your whole crew together, of like
It would
prep,
have it
right?
would have justified how long the middle section of the game is. And I think just that end heist would have made for a much more exciting, like when the stakes are higher because you care about these characters a lot more. Like
Yeah,
if Anchor Gadik had died, it would have been like, oh, and then I wouldn't have felt that much outside of it.
I would
But
have cared if Ank died. I don't know if I was that attached to Gadik, but if Ank died, I would have been upset.
Ink is a
Uh,
fun character. Any I love any character that's just giddy about blowing things up. It's like such a simple
well, especially because Aang speaks in
archetype, but it's
Huttese, and
fun.
you have that like classic Star Warsy thing of just hearing a bunch of nonsense that is like a very that doesn't sound like a real world language at all. It's so interesting
There's something about Huttese that just makes a character more endearing.
because it's like sharp and pitched in a way that
Mhm.
generally regular languages or real world languages are not. And
Yeah.
then to hear like her speaking Huttese and suddenly go in D5. Funny to me. Um, yeah,
That
I
was
loved it.
great. That was
Uh,
great.
I think Ank's section is good. I like that Kijimi is not an open world, and you actually do basically it's basically like a Metal Gear mission for a little while, where you do a
Yeah.
factory infiltration and get Ank out in this crazy set of explosion things.
Also, they're trying to theme that mission around tons of explosions. So the comical amount of explosive barrels everywhere
Yeah,
during that mission was hilarious.
very good. And yeah, Gadik's missions are fun because that's sort of where you get involved in the sort of wider Wars context of what's going on. And I
Which is
actually think
another
they did a
thing.
really good job of placing this game where they did between Empire and Rebel and Return.
There you go.
Um, I think they did a great job of placing this game between those two because it's just a really interesting period for Star Wars.
Yep.
And there's a lot of characters they can pull on. There's a lot of like tension to bring up. Of like the rebellion is a known factor and they're doing okay at this point, but the Empire's on a counterattack, and now things have kind of gone to shit. And like you get that moment of you can see Han stuck in Jabba's palace, and that's kind of pretty cool.
Yep.
Um,
There's a moment where you run into Lando and he tricks you into doing a mission for the rebels, which is a very Lando thing to
yeah, which
do,
I
which
actually
was kind
really
of
liked
fun.
the Lando mission. I think it was very fun
Yeah,
as a way
it
to get
felt a
sort
little bit
of
more developed than the other expert missions.
yeah, for sure.
Um, but what I do love is that Kay just like doesn't care about the rebellion or the war at
The great thing
all,
is like you
which
can tell
is
that
very.
Kay cares about people, but that the rebellion,
Mhm.
like her experience with the rebellion, the start of the game is that the rebellion betrays her
Yeah, they
immediately.
use her. They use
they
her.
use her and then leave her for dead. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like the tone of the rest of the game, because it's right before all the Waka stuff. So it is literally like you start the game, Kay is betrayed by like 3 to 4 people in a row. Um, so you kind
Yep.
of get where she's coming from with not trusting anybody. And I think that's a really
Yep.
solid start. And I think it puts it into a really interesting place where like the players probably are aware of like the Star Wars stuff and know the
Mhm.
rebellion are the good guys, and so they're probably rooting for the rebellion to some degree, but then they're seeing like, oh, I don't necessarily like the side of the rebellion as
Yeah.
much.
It
I
was a
think it's cool.
surprising amount of restraint in terms of like the wider Star Wars stuff because
And
it's
like
one thing I
it's
get
just something to
tired of in
mention.
Star
A
Wars.
lightsaber never turns on. We never see a
No.
turned on lightsaber in this game. We do see
We see
one
Darth
lightsaber.
Vader. We see Darth Vader who fucks up a room with the Force, and that's it. That's
Perfect.
it.
That's all we need,
That's
and I
all
think
we
that's
need.
great.
And I love the detail after the fact that Kay has no idea what she just
Kay
saw.
just doesn't understand what happened and
It
is like
was
terrified. It's
it was very
perfect.
similar to what happened in Mandalorian season 1, where Mando just couldn't describe what happened when Grogu was like lifting up the big like rhinoceros thing. He couldn't describe what he saw, which I think is a great detail because yeah, most people probably don't know what the Force is or really understand it. So I thought that was a great detail. Did Darth Vader need to be in the no, but
I do think it's
whatever.
fun to have the single scene. I'm okay with the single scene where he's being big and intimidating to one character.
Yeah.
I would have been a little miffed out if he was in the game more than that.
Sure.
But
It's surprisingly restrained considering how much Star Wars likes to like reference itself constantly.
yeah,
Did you see the little Boba Fett cameo?
yes, I did.
Um which was that is the kind of reference that I love because you're just crawling through a vent during the Jabba the Hutt mission and then you just look over and he's just there like talking to someone like over a holotape and that's it. Like you don't even hear him speak. He's just
Yeah.
there. And I was like, "Oh, that's subtle. That's something that someone may not like come across." And I thought that was cute.
Yeah, and there's a lot
Um,
of stuff like that in the game. There's like a line somewhere referring to they're looking for 2 ships, one of them being a Corellian YT freighter. And I was like,
even
yep,
there's a data pad that references the ship that what's his face uses in Shadow of the Empire, which is a bit of a deep cut. There's like
yeah,
a we're looking for this like certain freighter, this like Corellian whatever like model freighter, and I was like, that feels very specific. What's that in reference to? So I looked it up, and it wasn't Han's ship. It was the what's his name? Whatever his name is, but it was like a cute, just like 2 second little reference, and we're moving on,
Yep.
which was nice. But no, I did like how restrained it was, and it felt like a small story. It didn't try and feel like it had this big scale to it. It's just Kay is trying to remove her death mark. She's trying to survive,
Yeah.
which was really appreciated.
And all the references that are there are good. Like I love that you have a commando droid. ND5's a commando droid, and that's very cool.
Mhm,
Sort of nod to Clone Wars in that era.
mhm,
This is where you go through a droid factory, which is very cool. Like it's almost
mhm.
like a horror thing the whole time because you're like turning on the powers. Like something's gonna jump out at me at some point
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Uh, and yeah, Kira being in the game.
I'll say this: I was surprised at the amount of Disney era references we were getting. Like they were kind of committing to it, which it's like Kajimi is something from Rise of Skywalker. You start the game on Canto Bite, which is a ballsy move if
Yeah,
if you know you know. Just some like Disney era stuff where I was like, okay, I
but
thought
it's
maybe they
handled
would have
well.
went for the
All of it was
hits.
handled
Yeah,
really well.
yeah,
Um,
because none of those things are bad on their own. They're just in you know
Yeah,
media
and
that
that
not
stuff does a
everyone
good job
loves.
of like grounding this game, feeling like it is in part of Star Wars canon, which
Mhm,
I think is important because I think that's sort of the difference between the Star Wars games and like Warhammer games. Because Warhammer stuff is just wild, right? They can do whatever they want. Star Wars, it seems like there is some effort taken to make sure that everything sort of fits within the timeline to some small degree. Like it just they may not involve the same things,
mhm,
but to kind of pull things together, and like them being able to use Kira here, and get that's like solo representation is cool, as
mhm.
well as the original trilogy, the Clone Wars stuff, the sequel stuff. If you're into the sequels, there's a lot of things here that you can kind of look to be like, this
I
is
think
really Star
I
Warsy.
I think one of the ships you go through, I could be wrong, was like High Republic era ship too. I
Yeah,
seem to remember there
I
was a
think the
mission where
one
you
of the
go
first
through a
ones
High
you go through a High
Republic era
Republic
ship,
ship at the start.
which is pretty cool. Um, yeah, but it was never obnoxious. I mean, would I have also been cool with like all original planets and stuff? Like, I would have been okay with that personally, as long as they keep the Star Wars aesthetic throughout. But I think they did a good job of like, here's some new
Split the
planets, some like
difference, right?
lesser known planets. Here's some totally new stuff, like mostly new characters, which is great. And then any legacy character is either a reference or is at most like one of your experts, right?
Yes.
So I thought the like Star Wars look at us, we're Star Warsness was like toned down, which I actually
Yeah,
liked.
and speaking of, one of the things I do wish is I almost wish your crew members were experts, or like some of the effort put into experts were
Yeah.
your crew members. Because it feels weird that like the skills you learn are from random, like you learn skills from a dead battle droid.
So okay, that was another example of
Where
like
I
I
like feel
see
like that
what you're
should have
going
just been
for.
ND5. Like I should have that mission should have just
Mhm.
unlocked ND5 as the expert, not this other.
So that kind of leads me onto a thing because again, I'm not a Star Wars expert. There's a lot of moments with ND5 and K's stories specifically where I'm like, is that how droids work? Because I get that like he has his programming is like he's loyal to Jalen. He's got a restraining bolt and everything. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, it's all there are times when they're speaking to each other, and I'm thinking, Kate, do you know how droids work? Like if it kind of straddles the line of like I feel like this should be dialogue with like a human and not she's like, "Oh, like what are you going to do after the job's done?" And like, "Oh, you don't have to just be like you don't have to just follow Jalen's every order." It's like, "But he's a droid." Like
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think Star Wars is interesting about that because I do think there are a lot of Star Wars things more recently that have tried to sort of like show that there are droids that have more of like free thought as a thing.
Mhm,
Specifically, like typically the bipedal droids and things like that. Like Mando had a plot line with IG and whatnot.
mhm,
Um, and I think it's just meant to be more of like droids can have those sort of impulses, but they also can be rewritten and whatnot,
mhm,
and like have the thing where they can be wiped and all that. Uh,
yeah.
which factory reset, right? Like, what does that
Mhm.
mean in the context of sci-fi? Is a big, I don't know, it's a big question, a moral question in a lot of sci-fi writing, and I think Star Wars starting to do that is pretty interesting. I think ND5 is the best handling of it that we've seen. Certainly better than Lando's droid in the fucking movie. It was super weird.
Let's not listen. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. I'm not getting into that.
But I think ND5 is a good version of a similar storyline where it's like questioning what would he do if you weren't Jalen's droid, but he just doesn't have a conception of that. Like he just doesn't know because
Yeah.
he is Jalen's droid, right? He's not doing something different until you eventually manage to free him with the restraining bolt getting taken off, um, which I think is
There
super cool. I
was,
actually really liked
yeah.
that plot line.
I think in terms of not that Nyx isn't a character, but in terms of a character that that Kay has genuine like conversations with, right? I think ND was definitely like mostly well handled. I do think that there was a missed opportunity with that like droid specialist or that droid expert mission where you can tell that they want him to reflect on his time during the Clone Wars. But again, him being a droid, I feel like kind of muddies that a little bit, and they didn't go far enough with it. Where
Yeah,
he's like, "Oh, I'm trying to finish the mission that these droids were sent out on," and I'm like, "Okay, this is a good concept," but again, it just felt kind of underbaked, and I think they were going for more reserved, like ND5 doesn't really
I
want to
think
talk
some of
about
that
it
just
that
is
much.
we needed more missions with ND5 or a, like another mission. I think with ND5 in the middle.
I do think what we have is like good enough, like it works, but I think it could have been
Well,
so
would have
much
pushed it over
better.
the edge with another one or two.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's talk about the finale because we are running high on the time here. So,
Mhm,
I want to get into the finale bits because I think it's where the game kind of pulls its most interesting cards, for better and for worse at some
mhm.
points. I think the whole Zarek Besh being part of ISB thing, super cool, very interesting thing. That
That was neat. That felt
yeah,
very like
I'm very into
Empire
it.
ISB. Yeah, that was
Uh,
cool.
because it reminds me of like that fits the characterization of ISB and everything else.
It also explains everyone's like, oh, ISB or not ISB, but Zarek Best just had this influx of cash out of nowhere, and they're like this
Like nobody
super
understands how
rich,
they have the pull that
and
they
they're
do.
and there's your explanation. And the explanation of we want to start up a criminal organization to work with the other criminal organization
Yeah.
so we can kind of get in on the
And I actually
operations.
think like
Cool.
Jalen and Saliro's motivations make a lot of sense. Like they give you enough to go off of to understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Mhm.
I do wish, like I think this goes back to that middle problem. We needed another mission that had like Saliro and Zarek Besh as big players in the middle. I think really
Sliro
badly.
Sliro isn't involved enough. He shows up
That's
kind
the
of at the
biggest issue.
beginning and the end. And outside of like Far Cry villains, that's another typical Ubisoft problem where like their main villains just kind of show up and they
It's true
have
because
scenes
Sliro is
that
like
like
Sliro is charismatic as a villain. Like he's a fun villain to have on screen,
sure.
but he just doesn't get the time to actually develop it all. Um, like I don't know. I really like the final scene of him like dying to his brother. I think that was very interesting
Mhm.
and well played out. But I wish that we had had another moment or two to like get that motivation in between. Like part of it is I
Like
think we should have learned the ISB thing earlier and then had a
throw
mission
a lot
related to
at
that.
you. They throw a lot at you in the third act, which kind
Because
of
all
bogs
the
down
third act is
the excitement.
all the stuff we're talking about is past a point of no return.
Yeah.
So it feels like they needed something before that point that was like learning something crazy.
I do think it has to be in the point of no return because imagine Kay now knows that Zarek Besh
Yeah,
is like a front for the ISB. Like nothing should be stopping her from going to the other syndicates and being like, "Hey, you guys are being fucking played." You know, so I get that they had to introduce that past the point of no return
yeah.
because
There's
that would
definitely
have been
something they could have pulled in the middle just to have Slayer be more involved. And Sarek Besh is like, and Sarek Besh as an organization has no reference on the rest of the game at any point, which is really
yeah.
strange. Like it's odd
They
that they're
they needed
not
to
in
be
the
a
criminal reputation. Like I kind of wish they were there and just were always at the kill squad level. Um,
or have it like a very subtle thing where like instead of getting Imperial Death Troopers, sometimes Zarek Besh comes after you or something, and it's like, oh, why are these guys coming after us?
yeah,
Shouldn't it be like Empire or something? Like I think it again, it's keeping with the theme of the rest of the game where like everything feels just like a little underbaked and it was taken out of the stove a little too or taken out of the oven a little too early, you know?
yeah. I do think
Um
Kay's whole relationship with her mother is very interesting.
I feel like that didn't have enough time at
I
all. That
do
was like
agree
one of
with
the most
that. Like I think
frustrating
it's
parts.
interesting, but then it doesn't have any time to develop.
Mhm.
and then stops.
They have one mission where it's like insinuated that they've bonded more, and it's like no 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 no. We need way more than one mission for Kay. It's like what like almost
And like
20
maybe
years
that's
of
what needed to happen
abandonment.
beforehand
You
is
know?
maybe you have to like Rico is the person you got to get as your final crew member or something, and that's what
Yeah,
rounds out the thing, and you have that whole part of the game happens before the point of no return instead of being like the end of it.
yeah.
Um, Especially if you were like, I don't know, breaker up from a Zarek Besh thing or something. I think you would have been in an interesting position with that.
And then maybe she's like yeah one of the people you have to get for your crew, but Jalen doesn't tell you who it is until you
Or
break
maybe
her
Jalen
out.
doesn't even know, right? Like,
Yeah,
I think that'd be a very interesting thing.
yeah. I do like again. I think what works really well is Kay kind of realizing that she needs to be her own person because throughout the whole game you get the sense that she's trying to be her mother because that's how she was trained to be, and
Mhm.
she's not very good at being her mother, but she's really good at being Kay, which is kind of which is something that Gadik brings up a lot, where it's like, oh, you're a very different person than when you abandoned me for the for the Empire. And even Rico points it out, and she's like, oh, I kind of like this K more, you know. It's that I wish it was developed more because I think it would have propelled that concept
Yeah.
of like Kay's becoming her own person. She's
What I
becoming her
honestly would
own
be like
outlaw.
super into is a sequel to this game where Kay does do something drastic and isn't doing the outlaw role anymore. Because I could see there being a world where Kay joins the rebellion or something, right? And you play like a
I
weird.
almost prefer that not even happen though. You know, you
It's
can have
weird though,
other
'cause I'm
things.
like, I think there's other things, and they could come up with something interesting if they were to zoom forward in the timeline. But I think we need something that like drives Kay as a character forward, right? And I don't think
Mhm,
they can do the outlaw thing again because I think they've kind of
mhm.
told that story now. I don't think there's a lot more that
Yeah,
you can get from it without having Kay have the whole moral dilemma thing repeatedly, um,
yeah.
which I don't think they're interested in doing. So, but
I
yeah,
think there's
that
avenues you
said,
can go, but the other thing I'll say is I'm
yeah,
disappointed that your crewmates don't stick around. I think it would have
yeah,
again driven the point home that she's opened herself up to other people, but they just kind of leave.
it's weird that nobody dies, but they also just leave.
Yeah,
I kind of wish you got more with
especially
them at
it
the
feels
end.
strange for Gadik to not stick around. Like
Yeah,
Anka
like
can kind of understand, but Gadik, that was strange.
I totally would have loved like maybe post game you unlock a mission with the whole crew or something that's a little bit lighter hearted and like it's just a last
It's like
hurrah
an
sort of thing.
expanded it's like an expanded like food mini game that you have with Nyx, but it's everyone around the table
Yeah,
eating
everyone around
after
a
the big
table
heist or
eating,
something.
playing some sabacc. Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think just like that. That is sort of what's missing is that like whole vibe with the crew, but the whole bit at the ending, like walking through an Imperial Star Destroyer, doing the whole I'm gonna disguise myself as a clone or not as a stormtrooper. All that was very fun, and I think just
Mhm.
fun, like fulfilling a lot of fantasy from Star Wars stuff.
I
Uh,
do like how they tried to incorporate as many parts of the game loop as possible. Like outside of the speeder, they have everything. They
yes,
have combat, they have stealth, they have like space dogfights and stuff like that. They really try and pull out all the cards right at the end, and I think they did a good job of like trying to wrap not it just the story, but like the gameplay all together, which was
yeah,
fun.
and I think
And
having ND5 be like the actual final thing after you've already sort of
that
succeeded at
was
the
good.
other stuff is very good. Because
That's really what sold that whole
yeah,
relationship to
because
me.
it's predictable, but it's really well done. Like I think that's
I It's like the touch that they got that was perfect is that it's a boss fight against him. He's trying to kill you and you're trying to get his restraining bolt off. But the whole time he's still sentient and is like, get out of here. Like, I'm gonna kill you. Like, I don't make me do this to you. Right.
he's like, hey, you
And it
need to run
was
away, and like
yeah,
constantly, he's still giving her instructions to get away from him while also
that was a
being like murderous impulsed.
which was a great touch. Like that was genuinely very, very well done.
Yeah,
Um, and it's a fun like stealthy kind of boss fight too. You have to like set up this giant reactor to like shut him down so you can take the restraining bolt off. I also liked how it was ND5 who had the last shot against Jalen,
I also love that
which
Jalen
was
dies like a
nice.
little bitch and gets no No ceremony, no thought. He dies immediately, and you all leave.
Yep. No, that was great. I liked like the rebellion coming in to help you kind of escape with Asara. That was kind of fun. It was like I always love the trope of like people coming in last minute to help with a fight, and that was pretty well
Yeah,
done
especially because
here.
Asara is also an interesting character that we haven't really talked
Oh,
about.
do have a quick question about that.
Yeah,
What faction came in to help you
for me it was Crimson
at the
Dawn.
end? Okay, because for me it was the Ashika clan.
Yep.
So it's not set, which was a really nice touch. So I wonder if it's whoever you have the highest reputation with at the time, or
So I will say I
is
had
it based
excellent reputation with everybody. I had the literally maxed out reputation with every
okay.
faction when I
So then I
finished.
wonder, is it whoever you have the highest reputation with, or is it dependent on the decision you make in Kajimi, where you either keep the queen
I
in
don't know because I
power
know
or
Jabba can also respond, so I imagine it is based on your
oh, okay.
reputation.
Which
Uh,
is cool. I like that. That's a
Yeah.
nice
So,
little
because for
touch.
me, I think like I had every faction maxed out, but I had Crimson Dawn was the first one that I maxed out, so
Okay.
that
That's
makes sense.
probably
I probably did the most missions for them.
I don't think I was ever in bad standing with the Shiga clan. Like I was excellent with them very early on,
No, the
and then it
Pikes and the
just
Huts
kind of
got mad at
stuck.
me. The other two didn't. So, um, yeah, I like that a lot. It was very interesting.
Hmm.
I think Asara is a cool character, and it is like especially him coming back and being the one that betrayed Kay at the start, and then
Hmm.
is now coming back and in this sort of like uneasy alliance at the end. I think is very
It was
cool.
it was one of my favorite lines when she's like rescuing everyone. She's like, "I'm here to rescue you." Oh, and him too, I guess.
Yep.
That was like a
Um,
nice, cute
very
little
good.
line.
I also love like the final cutscene or in like conversations happening with Asara like going down like we could use you and then Kay's like
Mhm.
I think I'm done being used and I think that's a great relationship for the two of them to have.
Yeah,
Um, like maybe that's the setup for the sequel. Have Kay go on a rescue mission for Asara and then they have a buddy cop movie. I'd be into that.
that'd be kind of fun. Kind of fun.
Um, yeah, I think the cast of characters here is just really good. Like that's sort of the thing that works a lot about this is the
And
problem
it's
Assassin's
like a
Creed always
tease.
has. It's like when I think of Assassin's Creed Valhalla and I think about characters that I like. It's like it's real. I
It's
don't
real
have any.
slim.
I think it's more just I just don't have any strong feelings about any of the characters in a lot of the
I like
Assassin's Creed
Sigurd
games.
well enough, but like still not amazing.
But like I don't really want to talk to him anymore. I like his
Shut
character
up.
arc as a
You're done.
designer, but I'm not really interested in continuing to have conversations with him. So, whereas I think I would be very interested in like playing more with any of these characters in Outlaws,
Mhm.
and I think that's a really good sign. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, overall, the story's relatively simple, but I think it lands well. I think the
It
finale, especially, is very fun.
it has just enough like good kind of character arcs, I think, to kind of pull it through. There's a lot of like air. There's just a
Yeah,
lot of like nothing happening, but those three central characters work well enough to kind of pull it across the
I
finish
will say,
line.
I wish there was more space combat like the final fight against the Star Destroyer, because I think that's where everything sort of came together.
Yep.
Where like at that point, it felt like I did need to use everything. Like I had to have my turret up, I had to be using my missiles, I had to be going around clearing both the like ties flying around and trying to destroy stuff on the ship, and I think it was really fun as a thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, overall, like this is a game that I think I really enjoyed, but it just
Yeah.
has a lot of caveats to that enjoyment, and I hope it sells well enough that we get a sequel or
Which
Ubisoft
is
keeps making
not
cool Star Wars things.
which is not how it's looking. Like
Which yeah, we don't
apparently
we don't know yet, but
apparently it's not selling well and their stock is tanking as a result of
I
that,
think
which
too
is
is
not
like just put your games on Steam, Ubisoft. Your PC storefront is terrible in every regard.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
absolutely needs to be on something else.
And people are still they're not into the Epic Games Store, which is the other place that they sell it, and that's
Yeah.
just was a bad decision there. I hope it sells well. I think this is one of the most promising Ubisoft games that we've gotten in a while. Like, I think
I agree.
there's always this thing with Ubisoft games where they have so much potential and they either just barely don't reach it or they don't even try, right? And with this one, it's like there's so much potential here. I love the new way that they've gone about their open world structure. I think it's the best story that we've gotten from them in a while. I really like how they've slimmed things down and it's more focused. Yeah, like give it, I think, the time in the oven that it needs next time and kind of, take what you have and then just build off of it. I don't really think we need anything too crazy. Just keep going with what you have. Just keep developing, get some more loyalty missions in there, kind of flesh out that combat, get better AI. There's something here and it's good for the most part. It just, yeah,
It's like I think
it's
the
a story
reason
of,
we both want a sequel so much for this is that this is absolutely a case of like an iterative sequel would be perfect because it could nail
yeah.
down the things that are already good and then fix up the things that were not great.
It's
I think
this,
you'd
it's the kind
land
of
on something really
game
good.
It's the kind of game where like I want a sequel to something that like almost hits the mark more than a game that did it right the first time around. Like sequels for games that did it right the first time around are always exciting because you want to know how they can improve a game that's already great. But I almost want a sequel to something like this more because it's like, oh, there's so much more that we can do with this. It's already solid, but there's so much more we can do.
For sure.
Um, yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's a great thought to end this on as we've done a nice solid. We've hit our 2 hour mark of discussing Star Wars Outlaws like we expected we would.
hmm
So, yeah. Any final thoughts you want to give out, or are you happy, Wyatt?
I'm pretty happy. Again, I think the discussion around this game has been so strange, and not what I was
It's
expecting
been
at
far
all.
more heated than I would ever have expected
Well,
it to be.
I think it's because you're taking two very volatile things and you're smashing them together. You're taking Star Wars, which is always a minefield to talk about, especially depending on who you talk about it to, and you take Ubisoft games and you mush it together and it creates like something that, like I said, very volatile. I think if you're someone who's on the fence and you're seeing a lot of takes that are definitive one way or the other, I think a lot of the time you're gonna run into takes that aren't really engaging with the game in a I think in the
Hmm.
way that it deserves to be engaged with. And I think it's a much more complicated answer than game good, game bad, as I said earlier.
Yeah, for sure. I think this more than many games illustrates that. It like the people that like this game, I think are gonna really like it, like we did. I think the people that
Oh,
don't like it are going to really not like it.
I mean, I've been on the subreddit for this game, and they're all just so excited to be playing the game.
Yeah, like
They're
this is
so
one of the most
wholesome.
positive summer. It's kind of strange.
It's weird. A Star Wars subreddit that isn't a weird racist mess. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Um, I would love to see a follow up to this. So I think
Me
on
too.
that note, it's the end of the show. Why? Do you have a shout out?
I do. I do. I'm not very far into it, but I want to play more of it. I randomly came across a game called Black Skylands a little while
Hmm.
back. And this looks really neat. It's like a top-down sort of action RPG,
Sky Pirate
where you
Adventure.
can sky pirate adventure. You can walk around on your ship and get into dogfights. You can go to different floating islands, and there's a grappling hook, and it's like a kind of like a twin stick shooter almost. Cool art, pixel art style. It looks really neat, and I wanna play more.
Very cool. For me, I'm gonna shout out Analog Pocket. I don't know if you've heard of this. Is
Oh, I
a
have. Yes.
They just did another drop, and I finally picked one up. It's not here yet, but it should be soon. And for those who aren't in the know about this, it's an FPGA, which is a I think field programmable gate array
Mhm.
chipset, which basically is a chipset that hardware rewrites itself to mimic the hardware of a system rather than software emulation. And specifically, this is designed around Game Boy stuff and Game Boy Advance up to Game Boy Advance. So you can like plug in a Game Boy Advance cartridge and it will play on this like modern console thing that's
And
made with like modern tech.
it does more than Game Boy too.
Yeah, it
I'm on
can
the website.
do
Game
a
Gear,
whole
Neo
bunch of
Geo,
stuff.
Lynx.
And I believe if you use software, or not a software emulation, but if you have a method to get the things onto it, you can do up to SNES in terms of home console stuff as well, which is very cool. It has a little dock like the Switch does, so you can plug it into a TV and play your Game Boy games on TV. And the great thing about that is the only other way to do that with legitimate hardware is a Game Boy player, which is incredibly expensive if you get the working disc. So just get the dock instead for the analog pocket because it'll be much easier. On that note, it's the end of the show. As always, we'll see you next week. Tuesdays, podcast, pop, your choice, YouTube and Twitch, all that jazz.
I feel like a huge weight just lifted up. I've been wanting to talk about this forever.
We had a good turnaround time on this one too. I think we were both very invested in it. So
well, perfect timing. I was on vacation from work, and this came out like right after vacation started. So